Hello, everybody, and welcome to Games Done Classic, where we look back at legendary GDQ moments with the legends that made them happen. My name is Lat Mackey, and folks, we are in for a show today. Thank you all for being here and joining us on Games Done Classic. It's going to be a fun one. Quick couple announcements here before we get started. If you are interested in volunteering for SGDQ 2021 online, which is just around the corner, we are just mere months away from when it's going to happen. Volunteer submissions are now closed, but please do stay tuned for as more positions will become available soon. They'll be posted on gamesdonequick.com when they do open up. So if you're at all interested in volunteering, I do it. It's a really fun and great way to get involved and to give back and be a part of Games Done Quick. Frame Fatales, the all-women speedrunning event, will be returning on August 15th through the 21st. With Flame Fatales. This year, they're calling it Flame Fatales. Wow, this is a great name. It's exciting to see. If you'd like to see the game submissions and other relevant dates, head over to GamesDoneQuick/Frame Fatales. And if you are watching this show right here on YouTube and would like to support the live content that we do here on GDQ, please consider checking out our Twitch channel at twitch.tv/GDQ. If you have an Amazon Prime account, you can subscribe to any Twitch channel of your choice every month for free. Please consider using your Prime gaming account to subscribe to the GDQ Twitch channel. Your subs, your gift subs, your bits, your cheers, all of that stuff goes to help support and make the GDQ hotfix possible. These are all of the programming you see during the week on the hotfix only happens because you make it happen. Thank you so much for watching, subscribing, all of those things to make this happen. We really do appreciate it. Information on all of the hotfix shows, and there are many of them now. Almost every day of the week we have something going on. Head on over to GamesDoneQuick/hotfix. From there, you can find any information about submitting your runs to any of our weekly shows, which we are always interested in having people run and show games that we want to see these on the GDQ hotfix. Please head on over there to submit. Tomorrow, if you're watching this right now and it's Sunday, you are watching live, and tomorrow is going to be Monday on the hotfix, and we'll have the community spotlight showcasing Dragon Quest XI's. I've been told it's a very comfy 6-hour RPG speedrun, and it's going to be, all the action is going to be starting around 7 p.m. Eastern tomorrow, Monday. So if you're in the neighborhood and want some really fun, there's been a lot of great stuff happening on the community spotlight, please consider stopping by tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern. And with all that said, folks, welcome. So this is Games Done Classic. As I mentioned, my name is Lat Mackey, and I am going to be your Uber fanboy today because we are joined by quite a crew. Legends all in their own right of the speedrunning community. And so often, and I hear, oh man, the reason that I got into speedrunning or the thing that got me hooked on GDQ or all that kind of stuff is because of Punch-Out and the history that goes along with Punch-Out. And we are going to be visiting it all today. We're going to try to do our best. Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, classic game, classic moments at Games Done Quick. All of these people need no introduction, but I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway. You'll obviously recognize the first guest for his wonderful YouTube content, but also he is the current world record holder in Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. This is, of course, Summoning Salt. Summoning Salt, how you doing? Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me, and I didn't have much to do with these runs that you guys are about to watch, but I do know a thing or two about Punch-Out speedrunning history, so I guess that's why I'm here.
It's absolutely why you're here. What better person to go over the history than the one, the only Summoning Salt? And of course, the next person you're going to recognize from the very first blindfolded Punch-Out attempt on a GDQ stage. Of course, I'm talking about Sinister One. Thank you so much for being here. How you doing?
Doing well. Thanks for having me, and very excited to take this wonderful trip down memory lane, going over these old GDQ runs, blindfolded runs. It'll be a fun time.
Sinister says he remembers everything, so can give us every detail as we go along here. So, and finally, of course, the one, the only, what Punch-Out game don't you run blindfolded at this point? Zallard Wood. Zallard, thank you so much for being here. How you doing?
Hey, it's great to be here. I'm doing okay today. Doing pretty all right.
Well, glad to hear it.
It's going to be a lot of fun today.
Thank you all for doing this. And we're going to start way back when. And we're going to, I think it's really interesting to kind of set a historical moment in time and tell us a little bit about what Mike Tyson's Punch-Out was and is around the 2010-2011 time. The very first, I believe, GDQ Punch Out run was Mike Tyson's Punch Out run was Andrew G at the very first Classic Games Done Quick. And it wasn't until 11 where it was attempted blindfolded. What was the speedrunning? I'm going to start with you, Salt. What was the speedrunning community around Mike Tyson's Punch Out like at that time?
Well, I think the best way to describe it is it was kind of in transition from the really old days of Matt Turk, and well, he was the guy setting all the records back in like the mid 2000s. But then this was kind of a transition point where Turk was kind of done. People who were playing when he was playing were done, and Sinister One had just kind of popped up, started playing the game, was getting really, really good at it, and it was transitioning into a more modern community where you have a bunch of different runners playing it at a high level and setting records. And you mentioned Andrew G did a run in 2010. Andrew G is absolutely phenomenal, one of the best speedrunners out there, legendary name. I don't really know if you can call what he did in 2010 a speedrun. I mean, he lost, I think, a handful of times.
Yes.
I don't know if he actually beat Tyson at the end, but
he did. He beat Tyson.
Okay, well, he did end up beating him, I guess. But yeah, to answer your question, it was a transition. It was leaving the Matt Turk era, going into the Sinister One and beyond era.
Sinister, I guess then my question goes to you. What drew you to Mike Tyson's Punch Out, and how did you find this community and this game at that time?
Well, it was Andrew G. I mean, it always comes back to Andrew G. You'll note that theme throughout. So, and just to be fair, I mean, yes, Summoning Salt is correct. Andrew G was not doing any high level speedrun strats for Punch Out, but he was also running like 15 games at that event. Yeah. So, I think you got to temper expectations a little bit. That being said, I was at that event, Classic Games Done Quick, and I saw Andrew G playing, and that's kind of what rekindled my interest in speedrunning the game because, like Salt said, I mean, he was kind of using slightly more casual strats, and it made me think, well, what do the advanced strats look like in this game? I wonder. And then I kind of tried to research that, but unfortunately, there wasn't a whole lot to go off of. So I kind of had to, figure things out from an old website called Red Toms and some game FAQ posts. But that was the beginning. And as Summoning Salt mentioned, it was a transitionary phase where really the old community had all they were done with the game. So really in the beginning, it was just me. There was no one else.
I want to first highly recommend that if you haven't watched Salt's video on all of the records that Matt Turk had set, Salt, this one's going to go back to you. What Matt Turk did seems like amazing and fascinating. What did he do to this game that really hadn't been done before, and why were those records so important to transition to the next 10 years of Mike Tyson's Punch Out?
Well, I think what Matt Turk did that people before him really weren't doing was he tried to understand how the task worked and figure out what he could borrow from that to bring it into real time. If you look at the records that people set before Matt Turk, which they're hard to come by because people didn't really keep track of records very well back then. But if you look at the ones before him, they definitely weren't just casual records. They used speedrun strategies, but they were often, 15, 20 seconds slower than the task times that would come out around the same time. We're talking like 2004. And Turk just pushed it way higher. He looked at what the task did. If a strat had odds that required 1 in 200 luck, that didn't phase him. He would keep going for it. It didn't matter. He had no problem hitting 20 frame perfect punches on Mike Tyson. He could do that. He just, he wasn't playing at a task level, but he was borrowing things from it at a level that I don't think anybody before him was really doing. And yeah, it ended up in him getting 14 out of 14 records.
So I'm going to throw this one back to Sinister, but I'm going to ask this to all of you. Sinister, what is it about this game that draws you into it, and why even put yourself through these, at this point, thousands of attempts you've done? What is it about the game that you enjoy so much and that drew you into it in the first place?
Well, it's just a very simple game, but it's really complex underneath, and it's got great characters. It's this underdog story. It's very simple to learn and understand. You know, you're just dodging and punching and, you know, trying to recognize what your opponent's doing, the sound effects. I mean, it's just a really enjoyable game to play. So I had a lot of nostalgia for the game. That's what drew me back. I was, you know, when I first started speedrunning, it was one of the games that there was no speedrun available outside of the tool assisted speedrun, but I don't really count that. There was no human speedrun that had been done, and I was like, it made me so sad, you know, like when I discovered speedrunning, the first thing I wanted to do is look up all these games that I loved and punch out, and there's nothing. There's no video. So had to correct that.
Absolutely. Salt, when did you start playing the game, and what was it that made you take up the speedrun of it?
I started playing it like at a speedrunning level, I think in 2015, and yeah, it all came back to Sinister One. I mean, I used to watch his stream very frequently when he was doing Punch Out back then, and it turned into almost like I was watching a sports game on TV, and I found myself cheering for him to get the record, and I was really excited when something good happened, and then I was devastated when he lost the run. And I just, for Punch Out, for some reason, I think maybe the in-game timer, the fact that you would so visibly see the time saves and the time losses, it drew me to it. And I didn't have any aspirations to speedrun the game, but eventually I just decided, well, let me see if I can do some of the stuff he's doing. So I tried, and some of it was easier than I thought, and there were things that were a lot harder, obviously, like round oneing Mike Tyson with frame perfect punches, but yeah, no, I started doing it, realized it wasn't as hard as I thought it would be, and over the course of many months, it just kind of spiraled, and about a year later, I ended up getting the world record.
And to get Zallard involved here, Zallard, when did you start running the game, and what was it that appealed to you?
So for me, it was Sinister. Going back to
All comes back to Sinister.
Yep. At the time, I was running Super Punch Out a lot more frequently, but Sinister, he actually had like something of like a almost like a podcast kind of thing where he had me like come on and talk about Super Punch Out, and he was seeing the similarities between the two games, and he was just like, you know, you should like try Mike Tyson's Punch Out. You know, you're doing some good stuff in Super Punch Out. Like, I think you would be right at home with this. So very gradually over the next several months, he would constantly like DM me, you know, strategies, and I would ask, you know, like, oh, this isn't working, what's going on with this? And, you know, it would be like a lot of back and forth trying to like slowly understand like everything that Sinister had put together at that point. It's a really challenging run, and I really enjoyed learning it. I really like the Punch Out games in general, just because of the non-linearity to it, where it's just like, you know, if you're dealt a certain set of luck, then you have to adapt on the fly, like immediately. You have to react correctly. You have to execute everything perfectly. I really adore that aspect of running the Punch Out games.
I'm going to throw this one back over to Salt, because I've heard you say this before about Punch Out, that it's, as a speed run, it's not that challenging to pick up, but to do it at the next level that you all are doing at, that's where it can really become a thing that the skill ceiling and the skill gap might widen. Can you elaborate on that a little bit and tell us a little bit why it's kind of easy to pick up, but then more challenging to really get into the nuts and bolts of it?
You know, what's funny is I think I actually said the exact opposite of that.
Oh, the opposite. I'm sorry. Yes,
yeah,
you're right. Apologies.
You know, most games, it is like that, where they're easy to learn the speed run. It's hard to get to a really high level. Punch Out is the only game I can think of that, in my mind, is the opposite, where, honestly, if you're just learning it from scratch and your goal is to get, like, a sub 18-minute run, and the record is 14:55. So sub 18 is, like, a good, like, beginner time. I think it'll take you longer to get a time like that than it would take you to get a comparable time in most other games, because it's 14 fights that each have their own different sets of patterns. Each one usually has multiple patterns. You need to know what to do for every situation. learn how to time really, really precise punches, know how to deal with different luck that you get, different health refills, all these different things. So yeah, I think it's honestly, it's a really tough run to learn. But once you know what you're doing, there's not that many super hard tricks. I mean, Mike Tyson is kind of the exception because you're landing, up to 22 punches that you have a 60th of a second window to time. So like that's obviously going to be tough no matter what level you're at. But I think going from like a sub 18 to a near world record level, I would say that's probably easier than it would be for most other games. And yeah, like I said, Punch-Out's probably one of the only games I can think of that really works like that.
The video that we're watching right now, for those of you that were watching this on the video, you'll notice that it's from AGDQ 2011, and this is Sinister One's run of the game. Sister, take us through a little bit of this. How did you prep for this? We hadn't seen we'd seen Andrew G's. He was on the first, by the way, Games Done Classic and talked about the multiple. He just didn't. To prepare 15 games for a marathon like this is nearly impossible. But this was a time where we actually saw a speedrun of this. What was it like performing at that time? And take us a little bit behind the scenes on preparing for a run like this.
Sure. Well, first of all, unlike Andrew, I had only this game to worry about. This was the only game I played at AGDQ 2011. But that being said, I hadn't been playing the game for very long. I believe I started at some point in 2010. And initially, I actually did, back then you could do, nowadays, most speedruns, people do it just from beginning to end. But back then there used to be a format that people did called segmented runs, where they would break the run into various segments, and, you would try to get a really good segment. So I did that initially with Punch-Out, and I had only really started doing like full single segment runs, what's now the common way of running it, probably pretty recent, like close to the time of this marathon. So I was a little bit nervous and I didn't feel super confident. I wasn't very good with Tyson yet. And I had a bad experience right before the marathon. Actually, I was staying with a friend of mine, and I didn't know how technology works. So I'm trying to play hooked up to an HD television, which that causes input lag. I did not know this. And I cannot beat Mike Tyson. Like, I'm fighting him like 15 times in a row, and I'm like, what is going on? Like, I'm freaking out because I just didn't understand that there's input lag. Like, I thought I just couldn't play the game anymore. So going into this, I didn't feel super confident. All that being said, this was a really important run in some regards, because this was the first time I think that a lot of people had seen what a speed run of Punch-Out looks like. Like I said before, there was only the task before this, but people had not actually seen a human being like running Punch-Out. So I remember people in the crowd were like very excited about that. I think somebody even like mentions it at one point, like after I beat Sandman, they were like really just thrilled with how it was going and seeing all these fighters go down in the first round. And outside of Andrew G, I'm sorry, we did have the Andrew G run, but again, like the more like serious speed run of Punch-Out. So I think that all went well, but the fight against Tyson didn't go so well. Spoilers.
And for what it's worth, I believe Matt Turk still had all 14 records at this point. He was still, with all his unrecorded stuff, he was still like on top.
Yes.
The setting, I always love watching these older GDQ videos because the setting changes and we don't really get into, the hotel conference rooms for a little bit. Where was this event taking place, and what was it like with such a smaller gathering than we see now than the thousands of people that could attend?
So this was in a venue called the 4-H Center in Maryland. And it's just, it's just a small thing. That's all we needed. There were not that many people there, although the size had grown quite a bit from classic Games Done Quick, which had probably less than 30 people. This event, there may have been closer to 100 people or something like that. So, the room, even though you can only see there's maybe like 15, 20 people in the room, that was like pretty crowded for that time. It was a packed room for that. So there was, obviously anticipation for the run, but yeah, it was kind of nice to have just this cozy venue with, you get to kind of get to talk to everybody. You knew the people there, what games they ran, and it was nice.
You mentioned, being that there weren't a lot of runners at this point. How were you able to provide commentary? I mean, were you the one providing it? Did you have somebody who had some knowledge of the game? Like, how do you get, at this point, nowadays it's a totally different thing. We have communities around a lot of games, but how did you get a commentary team together for something like this?
Right. No, I think, well, so, okay, commentary was a little different. If anybody that you go back and watch these old runs, you'll see that GDQ was very, very different in 2011. Probably all the way up to 2014, I would say. But yeah, I think just a few people that like had either they liked Punch Out or they knew like a minimal amount, they would kind of sit on the couch and they would actually ask questions a lot of times. This was a more common commentary style in older GDQs that people would just be like, well, okay, well, why did you do that? Or how does this work? Or that. So it was kind of informative to the audience. They were kind of playing the role of that audience member, of the viewer at home, that, what are the things that they would want to know. So I believe Josh the Funk Doc and, Breakdown was there on the couch, and I can't remember the guy in the middle. I'm forgetting his name. But they would kind of ask questions, and I probably threw in some tidbits here and there, but I wasn't a great commentator at that time either. I was just trying to focus on the game. I'm like, right. I don't want to mess this up, man. Let me make sure that I play well.
I think it's kind of important too to mention here that Andrew G is in the chat. Perfect timing, by the way, Andrew. And he talks about how his Punch Out run might have been a donation incentive, if he remembers correctly. So that explains it a lot too. Just, hey, who could play Punch Out? Why don't we throw them in front of the on the screen?
Yeah,
right
I think I believe what had happened is it had gotten canceled. It was, maybe it was initially offered, and then Andrew, like I said, he had like 15 games or whatever it is, and at some point he was probably like, you know what, maybe that's a little overly ambitious. Right. Let's axe Punch Out. But people were like, no, Punch Out's awesome. We want Punch Out. So then I think Mike or whoever was like, okay, if you guys donate $25, then we'll put Punch Out back in. That was a big donation amount back at that time. Hey. First marathon. So somebody threw down that 25, and hey. Andrew G had to get to practicing.
Great way to support some more charity. Salt, I wanted to ask you this question. You mentioned at this time period that there were tasks out there, and I'm curious who were finding the developments or the strats to beat all of these things faster? Was it a combination of people running it in real life and taskers, or how were some of these things being discovered at that time period?
Well, that's kind of a complicated question, because most of the stuff that you see Sinister doing isn't, ripped straight from the task. He's doing a lot of modifications to strategies that I believe he found himself, and he kind of had to figure out how to make a run that was fast, but also didn't require the 1 in 200 luck on each fight that you would need to, set records and tie task times and stuff. So I believe a lot of the credit for what he's doing just goes to him. But in the task world, a lot of the original strategies came from these two guys named Phil and Janisto. They came out with the first Punch Out task, and given that it was the first task of the game, it was actually remarkably complicated and complex. And then you had another guy, Adelicott, who came along later and was kind of the second guy to task the game. And I guess one other thing I just like to mention about this run is you see the guy on the couch in the white shirt and the beanie that Sinister mentioned named Breakdown. You're going to see him pop up in a lot of these videos we're going to be watching. He's kind of the de facto Punch Out commentator on the couch. I've never met the guy, but he's just awesome. He is, he's not super knowledgeable on every little thing Punch Out, but he's like the cheerleader for when Sinister's doing these runs. He's like cheering him on, asking him how this stuff works. Oh, nice, you got Sandman in the first round, really well done. And you're going to see him pop up right on the couch in 2014. We're not going to watch the 2016 run, but he was commentating that run. So just got to give a little shout out to Breakdown.
Oh, that's great. And I think that brings up actually kind of an interesting point. Sinister, when you were were the strats, was it you trying out things, or were you trying to do things that you saw the task, or the only things that you saw Matt do? I mean, what were how did you develop some of the ways to get through this game?
Well, there was no seeing Matt do. There was
that's right. There's no
there's no video. So there's only what there was is, as Salt mentioned, you know, they're trying to do these optimized fights where it's 1 in 200 luck or 1 in 500, whatever it is, because the previous Punch Out community did not care about doing a single segment run where you play through the entire game. They were simply focused on the individual fights, because at the end of each fight, you of course see the screen with the time on there. So that's how people would compete. They'd be like, okay, well, I can beat Bald Bull in this time. And then somebody else would, you know, try to one up that time. So all of those strategies, they don't work in singles. So you can't be like, all right, well, I'll just get this 1 in 200 luck on this guy. So essentially what I did is I tried to modify. I would take, you know, nuggets and pieces of knowledge from this fight, from that fight, kind of just figure out, well, how can I modify this to actually work consistently, and try to put it together that way. So, you know, I would come up with stuff and, you know, eventually things would work.
I'm not sure who to ask this question to, so I'll just throw it to the group. You mentioned Matt Turk quite a bit, and not having video of his runs back then. I love the fact that basically it's accepted that his runs were legit and those were legit times. Why? What is it? What kind of? Why is that possible? Like, why do you all think that, you know, what he did was actually legit? And I think it's awesome, by the way. I'm curious what specifically are some of the ways that you can tell or know that probably those times are legit.
Well, I think what it was is, first of all, remember, you know, the game FAQs and Red Tom community, these were in pre-YouTube days, okay? There weren't like videos on the internet anyway. So it's not, there was no expectation that if somebody did something, it's not like no vid, no did, right? Like, right. So what they would do is on these forums or on these websites, they would actually type out and be like, this is exactly how you do the fight. And then, you know, people would probably try it for themselves, and maybe they couldn't actually match Matt Turk's time, but they could get some of those elements and see, oh, wow, okay, this actually works. So the fact that he was kind of revealing the strategies and like showing these things that could be done that people hadn't thought about, or they hadn't figured out themselves, or they hadn't seen anyone else do, they were like, well, I mean, it must be legit. This guy, he's explaining everything. You know, and there was, I should mention one other thing. There was an emulator back in the day called Nesticle.
Oh, yeah.
Which you could, I believe, record through that. So I think there were some of the fights, the community at the time, they would record Nesticle files and then share those. So it wasn't quite a video, but you could replay it in the emulator. So that was about as close as you could get. But of course, you have to deal with input lag and everything else with that.
What's crazy is some of those Nesticle files are actually still around on Red Tom's website. Which, the fact that website is still around is kind of awesome of its own, because it looks like it was ripped straight out of the internet 20 years ago and preserved to this day. I mean, it's really old school internet. And yeah, you could actually download these old Nesticle files, play them on a Nesticle emulator, and watch Matt Turk play Punch-Out from like 2004. There's a handful of videos there that still work.
That is so cool. So there, I mean, that's like a historical preservation almost, trying to keep some of these. That's one of the things that is a little bit of a bummer from our side of things, that, you know, not having the video just because of the historical aspect. You know, it's awesome tracking some of this history, because especially with Punch-Out, where there's such a rich history to it. That's pretty cool. You can actually still see some of those runs in that form.
Yeah, no, I mean, they were a little different than now, because they used save states. They could load up right to a fight on emulator, but I mean, you could see their skill is there. It's not, you know, it's legit.
Sinister, you mentioned it. I mean, I want to just revisit. How did you end up then getting a CRT or getting your final prep done before you had to do this in front of, even back then, you know, in front of a pretty big audience? GDQ had started to gain some popularity at this point.
Well, I didn't. I think at this particular GDQ, I only had gone just for maybe just even the day that I did my run. I don't know that I actually stayed at the venue at this one. So I don't know that I actually got in practice from the time that I was, you know, there or anything. I mean, they did have practice TVs, so it's possible that I might have done a little bit. Maybe I did just like a couple quick fights or something like that. But
Were there
I don't know. I just didn't think about it. I was just like, well, hopefully it's going to work here. And, I do this at home. Hopefully it'll be the same.
Got to do it. Were there any particular moments where you thought this could be a run killer, or nervous that, this could be the thing that brings this thing, not that the run to be over, but okay, what are those? I'm curious.
Right now, now in the video that you can see, Sandman throws those 4 uppercuts to let you know that he's serious. And this when you're, if you're starting out, and to be fair, even though I had been speedrunning it for maybe a little less than a year, like, you're still relatively close to being like a beginner in some respects. So this fight was pretty scary, and not all of the strategies were there that are there now. So it made it a little tougher, and I knew that I really wanted to get this guy in round 1. It was a big deal, because for anybody that played this game, when they were young or before speedrunning days or whatever, there's no way you ever beat Sandman in the first round. So that was something that people really, really wanted to see, because there are just, you can see there's kind of these delayed punches that deal extra damage. People didn't know about that stuff. So, people were really like, oh man, is he really going to beat Sandman in the first round? So I was worried about this fight. And then of course, Tyson is always scary.
And you're going to see Sandman, one of the reasons this fight is so hard is because what he's going to do right here, these triple uppercuts you have to dodge, those are so fast. Nowadays, it's not, it could be tricky. It's not really known for being too much of a run killer, unless like you're fooled into thinking he only throws 2 of them instead of 3. But, back then, though, they're really fast. They come out quickly. And to do it optimally, you have to quick dodge really, really, really fast. So... but yeah, he was able to do it successfully.
Yeah, it's a pretty delicate input. It's very easy to do the left up too fast, and it'll actually come out as a slow dodge. And if that happens, then you're getting hit by at least 1 uppercut.
Zealot, you mentioned it, so I want to ask about it. The dodging and the fact that you can left or right, or left and right and up. And what's kind of the difference between them, and why is that important to the speedrun?
You mean left and right dodges?
Yes,
or
just is there a different speed and dodge? Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, it kind of depends on if it's a quick dodge or not, but generally speaking, right dodges are about a frame or 2 frames slower, and I think that depends on if it's a quick dodge or not. I can't remember the exact frame data off the top of my head, but it's something to that effect, and that actually does come into play in a lot of the later runs that you're going to see.
I assume you were Sinister, but I mean, did you have all of the information at that time to know the mechanics of how to do this at the fastest levels at this point, or is this still early stages figuring stuff out?
Oh no, this is very early stages. I mean, all of these, pretty much 99% of the strategies you see in this run are obsolete now. I mean, this is like the very beginnings of what you could try to do and punch out. So yeah, it's pretty funny to watch and now actually.
Did Saul, I'll throw this back to you as we're heading towards the Tyson fight. Did we have all the info that we know about Tyson nowadays, with all of the the RNG involved, and how to properly do the fight with some regularity and some efficiency?
Yeah, the basics were there. I mean, the 8-second delay you want to avoid, and that's a 50-50 random event. You have to hit frame perfect punches. He can randomly delay. Honestly, if I had to guess, I would say back then, I think that Sinister One and other Punch-Out runners probably thought his patterns were more complicated than they actually are. Most punches, there's only 2 different delays he can do, and I think back then it was maybe thought there were more. I'm not sure how accurate that is, Sinister, but
yeah, no, that's true. We didn't have the knowledge that is there now about the various delays, and yeah, Tyson would get in your head. Yeah. So,
well, thanks to Salt to your videos, I was able to do research on this game. Just pull up a couple of Salt videos. You've mentioned quite like these 50-50 chances, and sometimes there's a 1 in 60th chance, and all these kind of things. How has that probability been determined? Like, I was curious about like how you know that there's these amount of option, or this probability exists for this fight and that.
Well, there's a couple different ways. The easy way is that if you're playing this game thousands and thousands of times over the years, and you arrive at a specific event and it occurs about 50% of the time, you can pretty much confidently say that it's a 50-50 random event. Like, it's pretty unlikely that something's going to be 48% likely or something like that. But more recently, like in the last couple years, we've had people who have really closely looked at how the game's RNG works, which values need to be what to determine certain events. And you could see if a punch is exactly 5/16 likely or 4/16 or exactly 50-50. And then usually to get a specific pattern, you need like 6 or 7 of those to go correctly in a row. So yeah, we've gotten better at determining it exactly over the years by looking at the RNG values themselves.
You gotta work there to on that first attempt.
Yeah, it didn't go so well. I told Andrew G he was up next if I had another problem with Tyson, so he was ready to back me up.
Shout
out to Andrew G.
I'm curious, like at this point, like how do you prepare for a fight like this? And I assume you just do as many runs as you can, but when you get in front of that, I mean, there's got to be some nerves, right? At this point, in front of people.
No, I was very nervous, especially given what had happened before. Like I said, that whole thing with the HD television and like, so I probably hadn't beaten Tyson in a while now. So I'm like, man, maybe I can't even beat him anymore. It was in my head. It was in my head for sure. And I'd say that plus, speedrunning is really about, this is 2011, okay? Speedrunning was in its infancy still at this time. There was no, power pack or EverDrive. People are not practiced. They're not grinding practice. Like you would just, maybe you'd practice a little bit, you'd practice a little bit here and there, but really you're just kind of doing runs. And it wasn't very efficient. It was an efficient way of approaching doing a speed run, to be quite honest, at least for me. Maybe there were some people that were a little more efficient with it, but the main trouble was that if you wanted to really do efficient practice, you had to use an emulator, but the trade-off is that the emulator has input lag. So even if you do practice on an emulator and you get used to it, then what happens is when you go back to playing on a CRT, your muscle memory is completely corrupted. So you have to reform your muscle memory to remember how to play on a CRT without the input lag, which takes time. It doesn't happen in like an hour.
An input lag for Punch-Out is just devastating. I mean, most games input lag makes it a little harder. Playing Punch-Out with input lag literally makes it like 3 or 4 times harder to just beat the game, because there's reaction, there's needing specific windows that you need to adjust based on what the boxer does, and having frames of input lag just throws everything way off, where even if you're used to it, which there's a few runners that are used to it and have gotten pretty good times, they're still behind console runners because it just flat out is a lot harder to play the game with input lag on an emulator.
I've heard many of you refer to Mike Tyson's Punch-Out as somewhat of a rhythm game, where there is that to get into that rhythm to play the game, and I assume that input lag just destroys any sort of rhythm to get into, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, I think on Tyson especially, it's kind of a rhythm game because you can get in a groove with his pattern if he's doing the same thing over and over. I don't know if I'd necessarily always call it a rhythm game, because boxers just can completely shake up what they're doing at any point and switch their patterns. But I mean, there's a lot of precise windows, and I guess that kind of lends itself to a rhythm game, maybe.
Absolutely, and I think this is a great point to kind of transition us. While there's a lot that happens between now and 2014, which is where we're going next. This I assume let's actually start with that. What kind of changes did we see to the speed run from 2011 to 2014? Did we see more runners come into the game? Were there new strats being developed?
Zallard was the new runner.
The one runner, yeah.
The one. Now there were 2 of us. Look out, community. Yeah. Here we come.
Well,
Zallard, what got you involved?
I mean, Sinister again. Pretty much. I started learning very gradually, and then it eventually started shifting into where I was contributing strategies. Like a lot of the strategies, even today, are from some of the groundwork that I was laying down with buffer strategies, and that'll be somewhat prevalent in the 2014 run right here.
So
yeah, the buffer strategies and maybe I was wrong. Maybe Salt, did you also start running by 2014? Was that right around when you started too?
That's when I started, I think, watching you run the game, you and Zallard both.
Okay, but you hadn't started doing actual runs by then.
The Kanana phone was the other guy who was kind of coming around then, and he played on emulator. And I mentioned before how playing Punch-Out on emulator makes it way harder. And, you know, Kanana phone, I think his PB was like 17, 15. And around then, Sinister and Zallard both had mid-16s. So if you had Kanana phone playing on console, I imagine he would have been right up there with Sinister and Zallard. But because he was on emulator, he was 45 or so seconds behind. And it was just really hard to close that gap.
True.
Yeah.
So for those that aren't familiar out there, AGDQ 2014 is, I believe, the first blindfolded attempt of Mike Tyson's Punch-Out on this stage. Once again, thank you, Salt, for doing a video on a lot of this history. If you could, tell us a little bit about blindfolded Punch-Out up to this point. Had there been any attempts? Were people recording their runs? What was a little bit around the blindfolded scene for Mike Tyson's Punch-Out?
Well, Sinister One is probably a better guy to talk about this because really all there is to say about blindfolded stuff is Sinister One and a guy named Schmitty 300, something like that. So.
Okay,
yes.
Sinister, how could you? What made you possibly think you could do this game blindfolded? Let's just go there.
Hey, I told you guys at the top of the show, it all comes back to Andrew G. Okay, so also at Classic Games Done Quick. Somebody in the chat, this is how donation incentives work back in the day, people. Somebody in the chat suggested a donation incentive, and you know, GDQ folks were like, yeah, let's do that. The donation incentive was for Andrew G to play Super Mario Brothers blindfolded. And I believe, summoning Saul to know, how far did he get? He at least got past the first stage or two.
Yeah,
right?
I think he died in 1-2. I think he beat the first stage.
All right. But he at least got out of the first stage, which was really impressive, quite honestly. I mean, I was like, what? So that kind of made me think about, well, you know, this will be a lot easier in Punch-Out. I'm thinking about, you know, Mario Brothers. There's like a lot of movement and stuff. Punch-Out, you're just standing there. You know, you just have to dodge and punch. That seems a lot easier. So I actually first tried it in AGDQ 2012 was the first attempt. But it was very casual. It was like the Andrew G thing of like, you know, I didn't practice it. I didn't train for it. I didn't come up with strats. I just did it. I just, okay, sit down, put on a blindfold and see what happens. That was it. That was the extent of the preparation. But then in 2014, the preparation had changed a little bit.
Well, what made you think that you could actually prepare for it? And what are some of the things that make Mike Tyson's Punch-Out unique that make it possible to do something, even attempt this?
Well, like I said, the number one thing is that, first of all, you're not moving through space. Okay, you're standing there, so you need to know when to dodge, but that's a simple input, right? You're just pressing left or whatever it is, then, you know, that's easy to do. Versus, you know, trying to jump and platform and do all that kind of stuff. Secondly, there's a great wealth of audio cues in this game. You know, the sound effects, again, one of the charms of the game, that actually helps you, right? Most of the punches have some kind of a sound effect or some of the other special moves or what have you. You know, there's good sound effects when you get hit, when you're hitting your opponent, all that stuff. So that really kind of makes it tailor-made to do blindfolded.
And like I was mentioning before, it's a game of patterns, and often there's multiple patterns you have to account for. But as long as you know the few things that boxers can do, as soon as you notice them going into one of them, you'll know what they're going to do next, and you can account for it even if you can't see it.
Sinister, you have been streaming a lot of your attempts for a while and a long time up to this point. Did you stream, or had you made any like these live attempts to do a blindfolded run at this point? Or because I'm like, the prep just seems so unreal to me. Like, how do you even prepare for something like this? And I'm curious if you were able to do any of that before you got out there on that stage.
No, well, 2014, when I said there was more preparation, that was like going from zero preparation to some small amount of preparation. So it's a little different from when we get to the future, you know, when we're talking about the later runs like 2020, that's a different level of preparation. But this was more so, you know, Salt had mentioned the guy Schmitty 300. He had seen, I believe, my 2013 blindfolded attempt, and he gave it a try, and he actually made it far. He made it, I think, to maybe he made it to Macho, and then he lost, and then he made it back to Macho, and he might have even beat Macho. I can't remember, but the point was that I saw that, and I realized, I was like, you know, this guy's doing completely casual strats. If he can get this far, I can get this far. I just hadn't tried, you know, this was just something to do as a donation incentive. It wasn't like a serious thing. I wasn't like, I am going to speed run this game blindfolded. It was literally just a donation incentive. There was no effort put towards it. But once I saw Schmitty 300 before 2014, I was like, okay, you know what? I gotta do this. So, you know, I came up with actual like strategies for the different fighters, and I did practice offline and whatnot. You know, enough to that I could get far.
Zallard, we see you there on the couch with Breakdown once again. And had you seen or tried anything like this yourself? We knew that you're speedrunning at this point, but had you tried anything blindfolded or anything like that?
So right after this run, I had my own blindfolded run, blindfolded super punch out, and that was going to be my first blindfolded run at a GDQ. So I had experience with that game. I had only seen like bits and fragments of Sinister's practice for this. So there was quite a bit of it that was a surprise to me.
You mentioned being a super punch out runner kind of before you were a Mike Tyson's punch out runner. And do any of those skills carry over one or the other as you started to pick up the other game?
Yeah, they really do. Like the games are all pretty similar in the way you can like control, handle, like there's only just a couple of differences here and there. Like in Super Punch Out, you know, like the super punches are meter based instead of star based, like in this game. But as far as just like timing things precisely and, you know, like manipulating guard, like all those like concepts transfer over perfectly. So it had like there's something of an adjustment period, sure, but it wasn't as long as I thought it would be, I guess is the point.
From a historical perspective, so I'm probably going to throw this over to Salt and Sinister. Actually, all three of you were submitting times at this point. So the SRC speedrun.com is still not a thing at this point. How are you all sharing? Is there sharing of information? Has it changed? Is the community changing at all with the influx of one or two new runners? Are we seeing any change in the community at this point?
I mean, I feel like we were still using SDA as the like central hub of, you know, information at that point. Like Discord wasn't a thing, you know. It was mainly just like posting strategies in the forums or whatever, or like developments, like someone gets, you know, an IL record or something.
If any of you modern speedrunners out there want a fun time, pick whatever game you run and then go look on the SDA forums and find the main thread for that game and just go read through it. It'll probably keep you entertained for a couple hours watching people talk about the records back then.
Yeah, it's fun.
And just to clarify, that's Speed Demos Archive, because a lot of people probably don't even know what SDA stands for anymore.
Yes.
But Speed Demos Archive was the original speedrunning hub. That is where these marathons are born from. From those forums is now how you have games done quick, and all those people would come together and eventually start having these marathons. So yeah,
basically on
SDA.
every episode of this podcast, we at some point end up talking about SDA and Speed Demos Archive and sending in videotapes and all that kind of stuff. For Mike Tyson's Punch Out, would you send in a tape of your entire run, or were you sending in just the single segments when you wanted a time verified? Like, how did it work at this point?
So by this time, they had actually developed a small software program, I guess you could call it. It's called AnriChan, and you could do it yourself if you recorded to DVD, which is what I did. So you were able to actually convert. This is a very convoluted process. It took a long time. It was kind of a headache, but you could convert your runs from the DVD to MP4 or whatever the format was, and then you'd be able to submit them. And they had to go through a verification process. They had to be verified that there was no cheating, that the quality was good enough, etc., to be posted on the site.
Do you, by any chance, still? PJ was on the last episode, and he still has some of his DVDs that he was recording to. Do you, by any chance, keep any of those old runs?
What do you mean, like these? Like these things right here?
Those old pieces of plastic?
Yeah, here
That's
you go.
awesome.
This is TMNT4 world record from, sometime back in the day. Oh, here we go. Here's a 53 on Super Macho Man. It's right on this disc, ladies and gentlemen.
That's history.
So
you could
cool.
sell that
There
for
you go.
serious money one day, I bet.
Yes. Oh, that is so cool. So Salt, I want to throw this over to you because, especially as a person, I always appreciate your historic content, but you're also an active runner of the game nowadays. Had you started to pick up the game? You mentioned that I think almost everyone at this point, Andrew G, Sinister One, these are the people that got everyone interested in the game. But had you started picking up the run yourself?
No, I hadn't at this point.
Oh, wow.
I think I either watched this run live or I watched it back shortly after it happened, but obviously I could point toward this run as being one of the things that helped get me into the game because one thing that people might not realize now is that this run that Sinister, the fact that he was able to get so far was really unexpected by most people in that room other than maybe Zallard on the couch there. Because, the 2 previous years he had made it about halfway through the game and then tapped out and couldn't go any further. And then this year, all of a sudden, he makes it to Mike Tyson without losing once. So it was a huge shock to most people watching. And I know for me at least, it made me just excited to watch the game and play it and watch runs of it. And yeah.
I gotta add on to that because this was the first GDQ that I got a chance to watch live, on stream, and just seeing this, it really blew my mind and opened up this whole idea of what gaming and speedrunning and all this stuff could be. Sinister, did you have an expectation on how far you could go blindfolded at this point?
Yes, I knew that I could make it to Tyson if things went well. And I was reasonably confident that I would be able to do it, but I knew that there were a bunch of fights that could easily derail me as well. So I wasn't like, oh yeah, I got this. But I had told Zallard and another friend of ours, DK28, the night before we had gone to dinner, the night before this run. And they had asked me, they were like, well, how far can you get? And people have been asking me this all week. They're like, well, how far are you going to get this year? And I really downplayed it because I wanted it to be a surprise to everybody. I was like, well, if I can at least, win the fight that I lost last year, then hey, we made it one fight further. That'll be awesome. And but them, I told them the truth. I was like, I can get to Mike Tyson, and they kind of both looked at me like, really?
I think part of why you mentioned it was because I had mentioned that I have been able to like beat Super Punch Out before blindfolded,
That's
and you're just
true.
like, and that kind of like lowered your, you're just like, well, I got it now.
Yeah,
That's true. Yeah, it did. You did mention first how far you were going to go, and I remember being shocked at that as well. So that was kind of a pleasant surprise that both of us had this potential to go so deep in our games.
Yeah.
Zallard, was this your first GDQ, or had you attended before?
That was my first GDQ. Yeah, it was quite a ridiculous experience, to put it lightly.
I gotta ask. I know we won't be watching the run, but any nerves running your first run being a blindfolded run of a game?
Yeah, especially following this run. Like, I can't even put into words like how terrified I was, but. I don't know. Somehow it just like all came together despite that. I think it was really like I was more nervous before I started my first fight. Once I did the first fight and everyone laughed, I think that's when everyone that's when I kind of like calmed down. It's just like, okay, just do the thing you did before.
This is kind of an interesting.
One of the best, just one of the best 2-hour blocks in GDQ history happened on that afternoon.
I can't tell you how often I hear, and this becomes a common theme on this podcast, but that, man, this is the run that got me hooked on GDQ, or this is the run that got me hooked on Mike Tyson's. You know, these are the runs that got me hooked on speedrunning, and it comes up so often. There is a great bit of tidbit here from behind the scenes. Railkun is our producer for the show, and he mentions that from the GDQ perspective, they absolutely refused to let anyone in the door once the run had started. And apparently they did a big call for anyone who wanted to watch. Sinister, I noticed you're not wearing headphones. Why did that have to happen? Why did we have to close the door?
Yes. So once again, these are the still technically the old days of GDQ. This is really kind of the last bastion of it, really. 2014 was kind of the beginning of modern GDQ, if you will. But they didn't use that same technology. So, you know, I was hearing my audio directly from the CRT, not through headphones, nothing else like that. And, you know, GDQs were very casual back then. It wasn't like, you know, super serious and serious runs and, you know, so people would be coming in and out. They'd be having side conversations, you know, all kinds of stuff, which I needed to be able to just hear. So they asked me before the run, they're like, hey, do you want us to close the doors and make sure there's not a lot of foot traffic? And at this point, there's like hundreds of people at GDQ. So it made sense to kind of do that. And the story goes, I've heard this from other people, obviously I wasn't in the room, but the story goes that, you know, there was a huge crowd in the room itself. It was packed. Completely packed. And then also there was another room that was just next to that room, or maybe another room away, that was like a food room, and they had a setup in there, and apparently that room was packed. And then there was a third place where somebody had like their, you know, laptop out or whatever, because they had locked everybody out, and there are people watching there. So there's like every corner of GDQ, there's like people trying to watch this run because they can't come in anymore. But it was full in the room though. I could hear the crowd for sure, and it pumped me up.
It's now become this thing. You know, Breakdown apparently took the initiative for it to have everyone be quiet, you know, so you could actually hear what you were trying to do. But that has now become part of the whole thing around a blindfolded run, where, you know, you need to hear. There are these audio cues you're trying to pick up. You mentioned there were a few concerns you had about that could be spots where if you got into trouble, it might be challenging to get out of it. What were some of those spots in this run?
Well, okay, let's start from the top. Bald Bull, who had beaten me in the past, and it's just a tough fight, you know, at this day and age anyway. Bald Bull was a problem. Honda 2, ironically, who I had lost to the year previously, was not a problem, so I was really kind of looking to get my revenge on him. Soda Popinski was a big problem, and he actually took me into, I won't say it, but this fight right here you guys are about to see, this one is tough. This does not go according to plan, let's say that much.
I was terrified on the couch for this fight, for the entirety of the fight.
Yeah, this was probably, I thought it was over. Honestly, at this point, at a certain point in this fight, I was like, all right, well, you know, hey, at least I made it past Honda 2. But I thought it was done. I really thought it was done here. I don't know how I won this fight still to this day. I'd have to probably rewatch it and be like, wait, what happened? But him, and then I would say also Sandman can be a little tough, some-ish. You know, Sandman, Macho, and Tyson are always going to be problems. Bull 2, yeah, pretty much like the whole world circuit is just, you know, can be an issue, I guess.
I don't know how to ask this, so I'm going to just ask it. When something like this with the soda fight is not going the way as planned, are you guessing at what to do, or are there some things that you can actually look for that might help you get through it?
At this point, well, okay, so with Soda Popinski, a lot of these fights at this point, you have to rely on your general knowledge of the game to kind of figure out what's going on or where you are in the fight. It's kind of easy to get lost. And as you can see, I went to round 2 here. And, you know, when you're a speedrunner of Punch-Out, round 2 is not something that you encounter. So round 2 is kind of mysterious. You don't know what's going to happen. And for anybody that hasn't played Punch-Out, the boxers do drastically different things in the second and third rounds. So the patterns are not the same anymore. I can't expect that he's going to do exactly what I think he's going to do. So yeah, I had to do some improvising and just try to figure it out on the fly. And I guess I got lucky.
And once again, it's tough to watch this and not think about the silence that's happening in the crowd. And I think that shows you how much everyone is just into what's going on, because to have any group of people actually do something like that and be into it, it's not easy trying to get the crowd to, play along with this so that you can actually do what you're trying to do.
It's true. No, there was at least one time where the crowd kind of erupted and they had to be like settled down in the middle of a fight. But for the most part, they were very on point. And the beauty of it was that because the crowd had to be quiet during the fights and they were allowed to cheer in between the fights, with each fight, you can't tell this as much when you're watching it on the video, but if you were there in person, the cheers just got louder and louder and louder after each fight. Like, people were just kind of erupting by the end of it.
Yeah, can confirm it. It does not come through the YouTube video whatsoever how loud, how like truly loud everyone right here, even in this moment.
Yes.
It just doesn't do it justice.
Absolutely. It can't, especially as once again, you're talking about we're still building the event, so they don't have it mic'd the way nowadays they have the crowd mic'd and everything like that. This is probably one microphone in the room at this point. So
well, they have whatever that I don't know what the technological term is, but there's something that like caps it, right, so that it doesn't get too loud, right? It caps it as a certain volume.
I remember at one point
limiter.
In the fight you're about to see, Bull 2, you're mentioning the crowd cheered at one point in the middle of the fight. I think it was at one point during Bull 2, he countered a bull charge, and the crowd just went crazy. And then you did it again about 45 seconds later, and everyone was about to cheer again, and they remembered, and it was like, oh, wait.
Yeah,
and then everyone's quiet.
They're like, gotta stay quiet, gotta stay quiet.
Salt, touching back on the historical aspect, at this point, was it known, had anybody beaten Tyson blindfolded, or did we know at this point if anybody had done that?
No, nobody had beaten Mike Tyson blindfolded to our knowledge in 2014, and it was believed that it was way, way harder to do so than it actually was, because about 6 months after this run, the Tysonator would end up doing it for the first time.
It kind of blows my mind that nowadays we have a blindfolded RTA category for this. Like, I assume I'm gonna ask, was there on SDA or anywhere, was there a category that even was possible, maybe for some individual levels or anything like that?
No. And I mean, people didn't really start running it blindfolded until like early 2016 when Sinister and Zallard raced it. Before then, it wasn't even really a category people ever did.
I'm unfortunately falling into the trap of watching this because there's some interesting stuff. Did you have fallbacks or potentially how you could deal with some of these issues with Bull 2 because of what makes, his unique, the way you have to knock him down and things like that?
I mean, it was the same as Soda Popinski. You just have to, with him, it's kind of tough because, you have to do these timed out things. Like you could see I was getting some stars there with the delayed punches, and that's a lot harder to do blindfolded. It's not as simple as like, oh, dodge and punch. Like you do actually have to have the timing, and there's no visual cue. For that one, there's not really a great audio cue either, but the biggest problem in this fight and in some of the other fights where things go off the rails is actually your stamina. So there's these hearts that are in the upper left-hand corner, which is your stamina essentially. And that's, if you run out of stamina, you can't throw punches anymore. And I think in this fight, it happens that I somehow knew that I had gotten down to one heart, and Zallard was like really impressed because he thought that I was going to do the wrong thing. And I dodged instead. And cause I had only one heart, and, I was able to win the fight, but I think, isn't that what happens, Allard?
Yeah. I think it's coming up because you're, it looks like 2 right now. I think it's going to be one of the next things. I think he has like, the smallest refill, and then you grab a star and you don't provoke anything. I think at the time I was thinking like, oh, he doesn't know that, his health refill is like this or whatever.
How were you able to keep track of that? That's wild.
I think, I don't know. I really don't know. I think it might actually have to do with if you get knocked down a certain number of times, maybe you only get one heart back, or I don't know. I'm not sure. I just knew.
Yeah, it's this right here.
Yeah. You could see your mouth like opened a bit while that phase was going on, Zalor. Like you knew.
Yeah. I was just like, he did it right, dude.
Were you doing any? Because at this point, I think there is a practice room going on at GDQs. Had you done any of practice runs in there or anything like that? You know, to try to at least simulate something like of a crowd watching while you're doing this, Sinister?
No. So you know, I had the good fortune of one of my close friends lived very close to this particular venue. And so I would stay with him during the event, and there was a CRT that I could use. So I did all my practice just there in the quiet and peace and quiet.
I do have to say, and I'm not sure if this is thoughtful or on purpose, but as I've attended a few of these GDQs with the blindfolded runs, I rarely see any of you in a practice room doing this. And if it's for showmanship, thumbs up for that, by the way. It's awesome. But is it just a little bit easier, or is there something, you know, trying to stay away from the crowd as long as possible? I mean, did that help, or is that a way to prep for these things?
I think it's a different approach. I mean, Zalor could talk about his approach. It's a little different from mine.
Yeah, I didn't really mind. I totally practiced in the practice room.
Cool.
Sometimes like people would like gather around and I wouldn't be looking. I would have like the blindfold on and just look down and then like finish, and suddenly there's just like, you know, like 30 people. When I, you know, look again, I'm like, oh, hey, sup?
All of a sudden there's folks around.
Yeah, they're just like all watching and like not wanting to make any noise, which is funny because, you know, the practice room has like a ton of noise just all over the place. So
I think you had headphones too, right? Wasn't there like one TV with the headphone jack and you were able to use that?
That one, I think I did that more for 2014 because there was just this there was this one tiny like red TV, and it's like, I don't care that it's small. Like I'm just gonna. I don't need to see that.
Yeah.
So I totally I used that for like the entirety of my practice for 2014. And I think 2016 I totally just, you know, I don't think I used headphones that much. I can't remember because I don't think I had like audio conversion cables or anything by then. I think I was just winging it and kind of like simulating, you know, like if there was an audience or noise or whatever.
I think it's kind of a good time actually to visit Dawn 2 conversation here a little bit, because I noticed that you waited for the end of the round, nothing happening. I guess let me throw it over to Salt first. What makes the Dawn 2 fight kind of interesting? I know there's some interesting details because it's not always the most challenging fight at this point in the game.
Yeah, Dawn 2 is weird. I don't really know where the programmers were going with him. I think he's kind of like, he's pretty easy for where he's located in the game, fourth to the end. And honestly, that goes for casually playing, speed running, and fighting him blindfolded. He's like not that hard for any of the three, really. There's so many oddities on this fight. Like I could go on for a really long time, but there's random stars you can get that are 1 in 16. There's 3 different refills you can get at pretty much every single knockdown. The one nice thing is that his pattern is usually the same, but if you do certain things, that will modify it and change it. For half of round 1 and round 2, he just stands there and does nothing unless you punch him, which really, for like a late World Circuit fight, that's really not that hard to deal with. So yeah, I mean, you notice that Sinister took care of him pretty easily there. The only knockdown he took was an intentional one to make the fight even faster and easier.
So, Sinister, you mentioned during your 2000, the first run we watched, the 2011 AGDQ run, that Sandman was a challenging fight even then. How did you, or what did you develop and learn to do this blindfolded? Because it seems it was one of my challenging parts when I played through the game casually. So I'm curious how you even go about finding strats to do this blindfolded.
Well, I'm looking at it now and I'm like, oh goodness, there's not even the buffer strat. I'm having to time out these delayed punches. I think I did develop a semi buffer strat for the triple uppercuts, and it wasn't 100% guaranteed, but it had a fairly high success rate. And I believe that I had enough good fortune that it worked. I got the right pattern that I needed. But really, again, that comes back to Zallard. So, you know, Zallard with his amazing super punch out knowledge and whatnot, he had kind of brought these ideas of buffer strats and everything else to Mike Tyson's punch out. So I was able to borrow some of that and kind of integrate it into the run.
Zallard, what made you think or to try some of those things you had learned in Super Punch Out and Punch Out? Like, was that just experimenting and trying to break the game somehow?
So in Super Punch Out, when you get there's this mechanic called the dizzy mechanic, where if you punch an opponent consecutively very quickly, they'll go into a dizzy state. They won't be in the center of the ring for a set amount of time, and that's usually where I would do buffer strategies. So it didn't really make sense as much to do it in this game, except there were a couple of instances where that happened, and eventually it was just like, wait, no, this actually does kind of work. You know, there is this amount of, you know, time between this punch and, you know, this action and this punch. So it kind of eventually took over a lot of the speedrun.
So was Matt, you know, going back to Matt Turk's runs and these records that were initially set that you all set out to try and beat, was he doing any of those buffer strats? Like, had he discovered any of that stuff?
I don't believe so.
Yeah, I don't think there was. Okay. I don't think there was anything that he did that could be considered a buffer. Like, I'm trying to think if there was even anything. I know when Sinister started, there was really nothing in terms of buffer strats, so I don't think Turk was doing anything.
Like,
yeah.
if anything, if buffers were known, they probably would have found the Dawn 1 buffer by then, but yeah. I ended up finding it, basically Sinister was kind of like just daring me to do it, and I'm just like, I'll do it. I'll find something. And
he found it all right.
Yeah.
So probably, I mean, honestly, is the most important discovery in speedrunning single segment punch out, hands down. Hands down. If people could not just get that free frame perfect star on the 4th fight and they had to keep resetting on Dawn 1 with King Hippo being right afterwards, that is a heavy deterrent from people wanting to join the community. So that's a big part of why the community is so big, is that Zallard found that strat.
Yeah, even the first run that you were showing, like, he didn't get the frame perfect punch, and he got like sometime over a minute on Dawn 1, and now it's consistently 14 seconds every time.
Mm-hmm.
I guess we should probably actually describe this a little bit too, because we talk about it as if, you know, it's now part of the vocabulary and that goes along with this. But what exactly is a buffer strat? When you buffer an input, what does that mean? And I'll throw it over to you as being the one who brought it to the game, probably.
So in the most simplest terms that I can think of, it's just holding a button. So the way the Punch-Out games work, all of the Punch-Out games have this, where if you hold a punch way ahead of time, then your boxer will throw out that punch on the first available frame. And that seems like kind of a trivial detail, but you can extend that concept so much and end up just getting free punches on, you know, an exact time every time. And that really, really helped out consistency with this game in particular.
Does that work for star punches as well? Like, is it his whole attacks, all of his attacks?
Yeah, I mean, you could totally buffer a star punch. I was trying to think of if any buffers used stars, and I think there was one with Honda 2 for like the blindfolded minute buffer or whatever, but usually it's not used in that way. But yeah, you can buffer every input like in the game.
Salt,
Just like to point out, this is a critical moment in the run.
Yep.
I'm going to get up on a 9 count right here, which is something that I said that I would never do, and even had that written down in my notes to never do that ever.
Okay,
but I did it.
You read my mind because it's a big point, obviously, a part of the history. Why? What made you go for it? What happened there that made you do that?
So in Mike Tyson's Punch Out, normally if you just get up on a random count, the amount of health that Little Mac gets is also random. However, if you get up on 9, you'll get a full health refill in certain fights, Super Macho Man being one of those fights. Now, why is that important? If you have full health, when you knock your opponent down, they will get up with less health. So in order to beat Super Macho Man quickly, I knew that this is something that I would need to do. However, at that time, I again, this is something that you don't run into when you're speedrunning the game. You don't get knocked down. So it's not like I ever practiced getting up on a 9 count. And if you fail, the stakes are extremely high. If I failed and I accidentally didn't get up on 9, let's say I got up on 8, I would get a lower refill and I would have only 1 heart to work with. And Macho goes to town on you if you run out of hearts. Like, he goes crazy. You're done. You're dead. It's over. And then if you don't reach 9 and it hits 10, then you're done. And then you're sent back to Don 2. So this was just something that was like, do not do this. Do not do this ever. But I guess I was just so in the moment at that time that I just went for it. I can't explain it. Even when I like rewatch this run ever, I'm like, what is he doing? Like, get up, get up. But somehow I got up on the 9 count.
And it's worth noting that if he didn't do that, this fight almost certainly would have gone to round 2. And fighting Macho blindfolded in round 2 back in 2014, like, all bets are off as to whether or not you're beating him.
Yeah, you're probably losing the fight at that point.
For this stream, we have the volume turned down on the video, but you can progressively, first of all, you can see the audience being more animated now at the end of these fights, but you could also hear, so I highly recommend watching this video if you haven't, because it's drowning out the microphones at this point. It's getting so loud in there. I didn't notice this before, but at some point they had changed the estimate for the game to be Jedi. No longer was it a time to speedrun.
Yeah. I believe they did that on the Macho fight, if I'm not mistaken.
I also appreciated the fact that you took the time to describe why, from all the knowledge you currently had, this Tyson fight was going to be a real uphill battle. It was going to be, was it near impossible? I mean, had you beaten Tyson blindfolded?
No. I had not come close. In fact, this was actually a personal best for how many times I had even hit Tyson. All I had done, my entire preparation for Tyson was to make sure that I could hit him 1 time. I was like, let me just make sure I can hit him 1 time so I'm not completely embarrassed in case I get to him. Because I didn't want to spend a lot of time practicing a fight which I know I can't win, first of all, and second of all, I might not even get to. So I had minimal practice on Tyson. So even that was a PB. And it does sometimes get like taken out of context of what I said about how it being impossible. I was saying that in the context of for me to beat Tyson in that moment, not for anybody ever to beat Tyson in that moment. But for me to beat Tyson in that moment would have been the Powerball odds or whatever it was that I said. But I knew that it would be very difficult for it to be done at all. But when it comes to speedrunning, obviously never say never.
And it came from just kind of a fundamental misunderstanding of how the fight worked, because first off, he didn't know that you could just skip the first 1.5 minutes by doing a buffer strategy. And once that was figured out, that kind of changed everything.
Then the fight becomes, I don't want to say free, but yes, it's fundamentally changes the fight.
Yeah, it's suddenly way more realistic.
There's also, I think he might have thought there were more delays that he could have done, and in reality there's usually only 2, and that narrows it down quite a bit too. So
yes.
Well, if there's one thing we've learned at all in watching all of these old runs, is that never say never, because inevitably there is going to be what we will be seeing next. And for this and for that, we are going to take a quick break, folks. But don't go anywhere. We have tons more Mike Tyson's Punch-Out with the all-star crew, if you will, here with Summoning Salt, Sinister One, Zallard One. When we return after the break, we're going to take just a quick break. We'll be looking back at AGDQ 2016, where the blindfolded run becomes a race between who would have ever thought that? Can't even finish a blindfolded run. Now we're going to be moving on to actually racing the darn thing. So thank you all for being here. Don't go anywhere. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back right after this. And welcome back to a Games Done Classic, where we are looking back at legendary GDQ moments with the legends that made them happen. And wow, 3 legendary folks on the panel tonight. Thank you so much all for being here. Summoning Salt, Zallard One, Sinister One, and we're looking back at the history of Mike Tyson's Punch-Out and the Punch-Outs, you know, everything that's gone associated with Punch-Out up to this point. Because to be perfectly honest, it's probably the one that I hear the most often is, this is the thing that got me into speedrunning. This is the thing that got me into GDQ. This is the thing that got me passionate about this community, was all the Punch-Out stuff. And the next run we're going to be looking at here is AGDQ 2016, which is a Mike Tyson's blindfolded Punch-Out race between Sinister One and Zallard One. Before we get to the kind of the ins and outs of being able to actually do a race of this, we just watched 2014. How has the game and the speed run, and I'll start us off with Salt. How is the game changing? How is the run changing? You mentioned that this is about the time you start speed reading the game. So what are we seeing as far as development goes in the game itself?
Well, yeah, you're right. This was about when I started to get better at running the game. I mean, it's hard. There's so many things that have changed, honestly, between each of these runs. There's more buffers for each of the 3 runs we've seen so far, and also the 4th run that we're going to be watching in a little bit. The world record holder at the time for single segment was different for each run. The first one was Turk. Sinister was the record holder 2014 for this run. Zallard One was the record holder, and then I'm going to be the record holder for the last one. And in terms of blindfolded stuff, I mean, the big difference between this run and the last one is just consistency, especially on Mike Tyson, because these guys needed to be reasonably confident that they could beat Mike Tyson at the end of a blindfolded run live. And that was not easy to guarantee. I was helping them a little bit, prepare with strategies and stuff, come up with a couple things. And I remember that neither of them was particularly confident on Mike Tyson. I mean, they were both practicing a lot leading up to this. They can tell you more about that than I can, absolutely. But I remember there was a lot of nervousness and uncertainty on the Mike Tyson fight.
So, Zallard, let's start with you. And you had mentioned that you had already been speedrunning Super Punch-Out blindfolded. When did you start picking up the Mike Tyson's Punch-Out blindfolded game, and what made you try that? What put you in that position to do so?
Well, at the time I had the record for, the duration of this run, but yeah, I think it was Sinister submitted MTPO to AGDQ, and I felt like, considering I'd beaten Super Punch-Out in a marathon setting, I was just kind of like, maybe I could also try Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, especially since Tyson had pretty much been solved at this point. The killer minute 30 initial part of the fight has been neutralized pretty much thanks to Jack Wedge finding the buffer strategy. He also found several other different buffers that helped with consistency gradually throughout the run. All that stuff helped out a lot, and it made a race a bit more viable. So that's why it's a race this time.
Sinister, just looking over on the webcam image, you can tell the venue has changed. There's a lot more people. You're wearing headphones this time. Was there anything about, I guess tell us about what the difference is between, running the blindfolded we just saw it in 2014, and then at this point, had the event changing. What did it feel like from your perspective as far as changes went?
Well, before we get to that, I did want to just add that along with Jack Wedge, there was the Tysonator Daniel Teixeira, which he had been, I think Salt maybe mentioned this earlier, he had become the first person that had beaten Tyson blindfolded, which is really poetic because he's the first person that ever beat Mike Tyson in round one way back in the day. He's from the old community, and then he kind of came back for some of this stuff. But as far as the venue and everything, yeah, it was really different. We were in a big venue now. Well, bigger. I mean, it's still a hotel. I guess 2014 was a hotel, but there's just more people. So, I remember, going into the event and you just see so many people that you didn't know, or, there's a lot more people that are, I guess, fans, or maybe they're just starting speed running or things like that. The headphones situation, I remember, I had to tell them to turn the volume up at one point, and it actually went a little too loud. My ears were probably ringing for a couple of days there afterwards, but I had to do it because for me, I can easily get too distracted if I can hear, and I could just hear the commentators. Like I could just hear what they were saying, just barely. And so I was like, pump up the volume. So yeah, I think Zallard, you were actually able to hear them throughout, right? You just dealt
Not
with
exactly. It was extremely faint. The only times I could hear anything was during moments of silence. So like if the game was silent, then I could pick up like, kind of an inkling of something, maybe like a couple words that someone says. And that's pretty much it. There's actually a moment where that does give me, like kind of like accidental information. Very, very late. I'll bring it up when we get to it, but sure. Yeah.
And you mentioned it, so I think it is important to hit upon it. And I guess I'll throw this one over to Salt again, too, for the historical perspective. That Zallard mentioned that Tyson had kind of been solved, or you'd figure out what did change in the Tyson fight that had made it more viable or become a thing.
The big thing at this point was Jack Wedge's buffer. Because the real hard part with Tyson is in the first minute and a half of the fight, he throws these uppercuts that knock you down in one punch, and they come out, for most of them, there's two different timings on when they can come out, but it's like, at this time, if you guessed wrong, you'd get knocked down. If you get knocked down 3 times, the fight's over. So this guy, Jack Wedge, came up with a strategy to skip the first minute and a half by just punching him in the face, and he blocks all of them when you punch him in the face. But punch him in the face until you go pink and you run out of stamina, you run out of hearts. And then you can dodge out of the way of the few punches he throws when you're pink, because those come out at the same time every time, and rinse and repeat for the first minute and a half of the fight, and you're never really at any risk of being punched. So that made it viable to at least get attempts going on Tyson, and then once they got that, it was just a matter of figuring out his round 2 patterns, the best way to beat him there, the safest strategies to take. And even then, I mean, it was really sketchy, like I said before, but it at least made it viable to beat him in a marathon setting.
The one thing that seems to be kind of a common theme so far throughout all of the runs we've seen is that at the time period, if there was a platform to share information was getting shared. Is that still happening at this point? And I guess I'll throw this one over to Sinister. I mean, are we still, it's 2016, so I assume we're still sharing information on SDA, and were these new strats and things like that being shared?
Oh, absolutely. I think by this point, SDA is probably not being utilized quite as much, and Discord still doesn't exist, I want to say, but
I think it kind of existed. I think I was like just starting to use it by then.
Okay. Maybe it was just starting. But I mean, we had enough contact we probably sent, DMs on SDA or whatever needed to be, or in the forum, or there was a lot more people streamed. So, Twitch chat was another way of communicating. There were more means to communicate, I guess.
Yeah.
It was a bit of a weird transition time for communication in Punch-Out, because the forums were mostly dead at that point. I mean, there was maybe like a post every month or two. Discord wasn't really around. I don't think I made my account till probably early 2017. And then Twitch had a messaging system. Like now you use whispers, but back then they had a direct messaging system, and they ended up getting rid of that not long. I think they probably still had it during this run, but they got rid of it not long after. So if I'm remembering correctly, a lot of our communication was just on Twitch, sending messages and whispers and talking in chat.
Yeah, I remember using that quite a bit for sharing strats. I think that's when you shared like the Bull 2 thing for this run through Twitch message.
That was like my claim to fame at this point. Was I figured out something on Bull 2 you could use blindfolded, and Breakdown gave me a shout out in the middle of the run, and I was like, I made it, dude. This is it. This is my speedrunning pinnacle right here. I was mentioned on GDQ.
You could walk away at that point. You're done. It's the pinnacle.
You could take me and my 9 subscribers and be happy.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because there's no, at least we can't see anybody on the couch. Who's providing commentary, and how did you all decide on who would be the one doing that?
So Breakdown, of course, because he's the mainstay. He's been for, you know, every MTPO run up until this point, and, you know, continued to do so. And then we had Clage, because he's a fighting game commentator, and as long as we kind of like tried to get him up to speed, you know, we figured he would provide some pretty decent commentary. Like he has a pretty good outward like speaking voice, considering all of his experience, and he was interested in, you know, like the execution of Punch Out and everything. So
I'm curious, Sinister, were in these early rounds, these early fights, had anything changed strat-wise for blindfolded attempts here since what we saw in 2014?
Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, Jack Wedge basically revamped almost the entire run. The one subtle difference there was actually on Piston Honda 1. I had a slightly more advanced strat than what Zallard used. There were some reasons behind that. I don't know if we'll ever get into it, but basically, I was able to do a little bit of a faster time on Honda 1. But outside of that, I believe we were using all the same strategies throughout the run.
Yeah, I can't remember the details. I think it was something like, you know, I found a strat that's basically like 99% consistent for me, and then it ended up being absolutely not that during this run. And I was just like, well, I'll never make that mistake again.
And just as a side note, Railkun again providing some info is that the commentators are actually sitting over in the interview area because of the headphones and trying to, you know, I assume, keep from distractions or things that might get in the way of you actually being able to hear the game. So,
yes.
And even though you're wearing headphones, I assume we're still trying to keep it quiet, like in the venue. There are still audio cues that you absolutely need to do this game. So.
Yeah, I believe the audience was still instructed to follow the same format from 2014. Well, no, actually, I'm sorry. No, that's not the case. Because since we were both playing, they couldn't clap in between fights because we might not both be in between fights at the same time. So I think they were actually told, hold your applause until the very end.
Yeah, that's right.
That's what it was. So it was like dead silent in there except for the commentators. Must have been weird.
Yeah, no kidding. How did you all prep? I mean, did you do any races against each other before you got there on stage?
I don't think we did a single race. I think it was just like independent practice.
And
yeah, I didn't prepare for this marathon very well. I don't know if I've really probably talked about this a whole lot, but at the time it wasn't known, but I had been hired by Twitch. And I couldn't say anything until afterwards, but you know, going through the interview process, trying to plan to move across the country, a lot of that stuff was kind of sucking up a lot of my time.
Yeah.
And I didn't have as much time as I would have wanted to dedicate to practicing. So I was just like, please let me somehow be able to get through, you know, these fights. And, you know, I practiced what I could, but I definitely felt underprepared for this run compared to where I would have wanted to be for the run.
Wow, okay, that's an interesting tidbit because it doesn't exactly show. I mean, it's so impressive what you're doing. So it's that's actually quite surprising.
I had some good fortune. I think I'm not gonna lie, But certainly, yeah, I would have wanted to be a little bit better prepared. Which again, that's actually why I had that Honda One strategy, because I felt that Zallard had been able to maybe practice a little bit more than me. I mean, I don't know. Maybe he had other stuff going too, but I was like, I need at least one small thing that'll like give me a chance against this guy, because I felt like Zallard was just going to destroy me. I really did. I thought he was going to beat me by like 10 minutes, or maybe I wasn't even going to beat the game. So I held that little Honda One strat as my one hope.
Honestly, like if I didn't counter because mine backfired and I had to counter the Honda One rush manually. If I missed that, it would have been a disaster. Like, it was really, really bad. I think actually right before the run, we were talking about cues for the Honda 1 and Honda 2 counters in case we messed up either. And I think you were like, oh yeah, the timing for the Honda 1 counter is so-and-so. And I'm like, okay, I'll remember that.
Right.
I'm glad I did.
To retouch on it, just a quick point. Mike Uyama's in the chat, and he pointed out that the GDQ didn't even have noise suppressing headphones at this point, because the blindfolded thing had not been, there hadn't been enough runs yet where we actually needed these type of tools to block out the crowd, which is kind of interesting.
Right.
Had either of you beaten Tyson blindfolded before this run?
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
it had to be consistent.
Yeah. Salt mentioned earlier, but we had both been, playing and practicing well enough to feel that we could do it. Although I will say, Zallard and I, right before the run, were talking, and we both had some serious concerns about whether either of us would beat the game. So we were still very, very unsure about beating Tyson in this kind of situation. Listen, it's one thing to beat Mike Tyson when you're sitting at home and you're comfortable and there's nobody around and everything else like that. It's a different thing to beat Mike Tyson blindfolded when you're up on the big stage. You're in a race. There's tons of people watching online and in person. It's a very different environment.
Yeah. Even when I was doing like practice in the practice room, like I was getting 14 and 0s left and right. But when I went up there, it was just like, oh God, what? I can't. I'm blanking. How do you fight Bull 2? Like, it was just like, it was just terrifying. And that could happen anywhere. Like if that happens on Tyson, you're gonna get wrecked. It's not good. Yeah.
Salt, if you wouldn't mind providing a bit more history too at this point, because as we're watching through this run, it seems like the approaches and some of the strats are definitely there. They just look more precise, or it looks like we have counters and things to do. And as we've moved through the world circuit here, what are some of the things that have kind of changed blindfolded wise at this point?
Well, they have very specific game plans for each fight. Like you're watching Soda right now. You're going to see them do a bunch of right dodges over and over, like Zallard right here, right dodge, right dodge, right dodge. And what that does is almost every single time Soda throws an uppercut, you will dodge out of the way of it if you keep doing those right dodges. And when Sinister was doing his run 2 years earlier, he didn't have that. He would just have to guess whenever he went down for the uppercut and do the sequence accordingly. And then the fight after this, Bull 2, they had a game plan going into that that I figured out. That was my claim to fame. Did not quite go to plan in the run, as you'll see in a minute. But the point is, they had a pretty specific game plan for each fight, and occasionally it did go off the rails, but it was a lot more refined. Like, this is exactly what you want to do. This is what happens if the situation comes up. I think a little bit more so than in 2014.
I'm just getting mad at this Soda pattern I'm getting.
Yeah,
I forgot all about this.
Yeah, I was curious, Zallard, when something like that happens, obviously you're dealing with it, but it had to be a little nerve-wracking at that point.
It was. Yeah, it totally was. I mean, I think that may have sort of like put me on tilt a little bit with Bull, because that's the fight that I super duper mess up.
We just
and it's funny because like me and Sinister had our kind of like problem spot. Mine was Bull 2, and Sinister's is going to come up later. But at least for me, I felt like, well, I lost the race, because there's no chance that Sinister messed up on anything at this point. And Sinister was thinking the same thing for his scenario.
Were you able to hear each other's gameplay? I know we had talked a little bit about it, but like, did you know where each other were at this point?
No,
No,
not at all.
we didn't. We had actually had this discussion about. We were thinking of doing some kind of thing where we would be allowed like a peek, like at some point, like we each would be able to choose that we want to like. When we're not in a fight, that we could actually look at the other person's screen to see where they were, and then if you need to make strategic adjustments based on that, you could do it. But we ended up going against that. We felt like it just kind of took too much away from the blindfolded mystique. People would be like, oh, they took off the blindfold, it doesn't count anymore, you know. It just wouldn't work out. But yeah, there was at least the discussion of if we would do it.
The choice of having a webcam, we do have to give there's got to be something visual that we can pick up from the audience at home. I see what you're saying, Zallard. And so when some of those things happen, I assume, are you just kind of guessing at what Bull is going to do at that point when things really start going off the rails?
Yeah, it's just total guessing. I guess it depends. Like, I feel like my knowledge was still like a bit new. Like, I'm still like kind of, I don't know things. I would say not as much in depth as Sinister did at this point. So, like if something went wrong and I'm panicking, like I feel like Sinister probably dealt with that better. And,
ironically, that wasn't the case though, because if I had remembered a few things from Dawn 2 in 2014, I would have been able to apply them in my fight. But in general, yeah, I think that's true. I certainly had much more experience by this point. I just didn't have the recall to like actually implement it in the moment.
You did something pretty smart right there on Dawn 2 though. Like what happened was he messed up the very start of the fight, and if you play on from there, it can get really bad, and really bad health refills and other bad stuff can happen. So he just took an intentional loss and said, okay, we're going to start the fight again from scratch and try to do it faster. Did not quite work, unfortunately, but it was the right move. If he had just played it like straight as it was the first time, it would not have gone well either.
At this point, Sinister, you've been running the game now for 5 or 6 years. I guess that you do learn how to deal with some of these things, even if it's a blind. But the fact that it's in front of thousands and thousands of people, there's just no accounting for that scenario.
I think when you say running the game, also you got to remember I'm only doing this once a year, and maybe for like a month or whatever it is, 2 months at a time. So it's not the same as your traditional like running a game. Like if I'm playing speedrunning a certain game and I'm doing it for a year or whatever, like Rockman 2 for instance. Right. So it's like, yes, you're consistently playing the game week in, week out, week in, week out. But with this is kind of more just like a novelty thing. So it didn't really stick with you as well, which I found to be a little bit problematic. Like every time when I would come back to this, I'd have to be like, okay, how does this work again? Like, what am I supposed to do in this situation? I couldn't remember anything. I think I remembered how to beat Glass Joe, but outside of that, it was like, all right, let's get out the notes. Let's start going through and figure this stuff out again. But yeah, no, it was, it's tough. It's tough. And you can see I'm having the struggles right now with Dawn 2.
I'm really glad you pointed that out, because that's such a good point, that it's not like the grind of a speed run where you're bringing that, you're gunning for a world record or a personal best or anything like that. It's a totally different animal than that.
Yeah. I wasn't doing actual runs of this per se, right? Like it's not, yeah.
Hey, Salt, you mentioned something that I wanted to touch upon again real quickly about, finding a strat for the Tyson fight. And so that leads me to ask, was that something where you would just play around with things just for audio cues, or were you actually turning the TV off and trying to find something blindfolded?
Yeah, my thing was for Bull 2, and that was just a lot of, I was doing it with my eyes open, but I knew what you could and couldn't do while blindfolded. It was essentially just a really long buffer strategy that lasted like a couple minutes into the fight. And yeah, I think I did it a few times eyes closed to just verify it wasn't harder to do than I thought. But yeah, I came up with it with my eyes open.
Zalad, I got to ask you, because you'd mentioned taking on Super Punch Out blindfolded, and I think being that some of those skills did carry over a bit to the Mike Tyson's Punch Out game. What made you think that you could do Super Punch Out originally? Like, what made you think that you could try to do that blindfolded without seeing anything at first?
Well, part of it was that, with I guess the mentality of blindfolded runs back then, it wasn't as serious. So, like with Sinister's runs, it was just like him getting as far as he could. And I thought, like, okay, well, with Super Punch Out, I should try to get as far as I can, and if I lose, so what? It'd fit in. But eventually, like, when I started practicing, I'm like, oh, wait, I could, like, beat this. This is a possibility that I need to consider. And then, I guess this also, at least for 2014, that was the year where, he
Right.
had practiced as well. So pretty
We
good
talked
timing,
about
I
it.
guess.
No kidding. And we had talked about it during the 14 run, but how random that this Dawn fight can be. It's really it's Sinister. Is it the patterns, or what exactly is happening here that's taking so much time here?
I got a lot of bad refills, which is not uncommon for Dawn 2. That's, I think, much more likely to happen, actually. But just, again, it was poor strategy on my part. I really needed to hit that first round strategy that Salt had mentioned, and I messed it up the second time. And I'll tell you exactly what it was, is that, you're getting late in the run at that point, and my adrenaline was really starting to go. And when it comes to those quick dodges, Zallard mentioned this very early in the program, but if you do a quick dodge too fast, if you press left and up too quickly, it will not register and you will do a slow dodge. And that happened to me both times. I was just too much adrenaline, man. I was going too fast. Sometimes you got to go slow to go fast.
On the input, I have fat thumbs, so my thumbs slip all the time, when I'm trying to do a diagonal as opposed to a left or a right input. And the adrenaline couldn't have helped any part of that.
Well, you press one and then the other. So you press left as a single input, and then you press up as another input. So you're going left and then up. But if you do it too fast, if it's left up, then not going to work.
Yeah, in general, like, diagonals are really, really bad for this game. You really don't ever want to press them. You want to have every input be separate.
No, for real. I think that's one thing I've definitely learned from hearing the discussion here. On the dream fight, it seems. Is this the type of part where you're just trying to lock in and try to get? Because this fight seemed to go a lot better for both of you than the Dawn fight did.
Yeah, I mean,
this fight. Sorry, go ahead, Zally.
At this point, we have this buffer that you see constantly where Mac is dodging to the right, and that just sets up perfectly, the extended amount of time you have to wait in order to deal the higher amount of damage. So it's a lot of just doing that over and over and over, with the Dreamland Express in the middle, which, it can be scary, but as long as we get that and, the refill isn't terrible and we don't mess up too bad, then Sandman is okay. But, sometimes I think at that point the buffer for Sandman wasn't 100% even still. I think it was a little bit better odds than for 2014, but still wasn't perfect.
Yeah, I remember like all three of us tried to come up with a buffer for that fight for a really long time, and nobody could do. Like, I think I had one that worked like 2/3 of the time, maybe, but yeah.
It's cool to see the evolution here, as obviously more time and effort. You've had more time with the game to try to discover some of these things and get them to work. Because had I not known any better, you almost are making this look easy at this point after Dawn. I mean, this is, Macho Man and Dream, and these all look like you have things that work really well at this point. I mean, even this fight looks completely different than the last time we saw it.
Yeah, if I could just add something real quick, you're going to see something kind of interesting come up in a minute here. Macho. So if you take a look on Zallard's side of the screen, the crowd, they're flashing right now, and they were moving the whole fight. On Sinister's side, it's kind of hard to tell, but nobody is moving at all in the crowd. And that's because he accidentally triggered what's going to be a soft lock. And it's kind of hard to explain how it works, but basically the crowd gets frozen and they have to flash to initiate the game to initiate you moving on to the Tyson fight. And you'll see once Sinister beats Macho Man here, the crowd will not flash, and he's just going to stay stuck in the winning position. They're going to actually have to reset the game so he can put in the Tyson code.
Real quick, a couple of other things happened. Sinister got up on a 9 count on this.
Again.
Yeah, again. And for that moment, when the commentators were talking about the 9 count, the transition on my screen to Tyson was happening. So I heard the commentators say 9 count. I'm like, that doesn't apply to me. That's something on Sinister's. Like, is he on Tyson? Did he get hit by Tyson? And so I'm thinking, like, oh, he's ahead of me. I got to make sure I don't mess up.
That is awesome. I mean, unfortunate, but awesome at the same. Sinister, did you know that you had? I mean, obviously, at some point you're going to figure it out. But did you know that you had triggered that soft lock?
Yes, I think I did, because I had to. I believe I had to call for the reset. I can't remember 100%, but I believe we had somebody there that was like the designated reset person that would do it for either of us, because we had this worked out ahead of time. We knew that it was a possibility.
Yeah, the way it was set up was just, you know, if Sinister recognizes that there's a soft lock, he raises his hand and then someone resets it.
Yeah.
Salt, if you're submitting a run, is that does that make the run? Would you not be able to submit that via the rules for speedrun.com or anything like that? Would the run be dead?
Man, I'm trying to remember what the rules say. I think it's disqualified if you soft lock.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it. Yeah,
I think like
my run is no longer valid for leaderboards, unfortunately.
I think at one point we tried to make it work, like have a rule where you had to like add an amount of time if you soft locked. But I mean, it's not that hard to avoid if you like. I think it's easier to avoid now than it was in 2016, even blindfolded. So I think it's usually not much of a concern.
Got it. That was going to be my next question is how often does it happen? But if you have strats that can avoid it, I assume you can mitigate the amount that's going to happen. So
yeah, and it's interesting too. The developers were aware of the soft lock a while after the game came out, and they actually patched it. So about half of the carts you can do the soft lock on, and the other half, the crowd, they'll freeze. But then as soon as something else happens, they'll keep moving, and they will flash to go to the next fight.
So we're seeing the Tyson fight move into round 2, and Zalor, I'll start with you. Was that planned? Is that part of the new approach and strategy to a blindfolded Tyson fight?
Yeah, so if you're doing the buffer to avoid the minute 30, then you're never going to beat him in round 1. It's just, you know, most of the damage is by punching him when he's doing uppercuts, but you're canceling every uppercut. So the intended route here is to beat him in round 2, and specifically round 2. You don't want to go to round 3. Round 3 is extremely inconsistent and scary for blindfolded runs. And
Zalor did it. He won.
Now I gotta. I mean, so the first time I assume that you know what actually happened is when you take off the blindfold, right? Or did you know before then?
I had no idea until I took off the blindfold, and I was just like, I looked at his screen and I saw Tyson, and for like the briefest moment, I'm like, he's tricking me. Like he beat me, and he's just playing, you know, Tyson. He's just gotcha, Zalor. But no. But I'm just like, wait, no, he's got the blindfold on. It's all, you know, somehow I won.
That would have been so funny if that's actually what he did. Like he was just practicing Tyson for no reason.
That would have been pretty messed up.
That didn't happen. I had to go through my own struggles here because things didn't go according to plan for me. And the commentators didn't know this at the time, but I had to actually hit a frame perfect punch blindfolded with no cues to get this TKO to not go to round 3, which was just mentioned as the place that you absolutely cannot go. So I could not believe that I hit that frame perfect punch blindfolded. So even though I saw that Zalor had won, I was just like, I don't care. I actually won the game. I had no business winning. So I was still super happy that, you know, first of all, that both of us had beaten the game. Yeah. But you know, that I survived that was incredible. Thank goodness.
Yeah,
You know,
when I was watching that, I was just like, like, oh my god, he has to hit this. Like, he has to know to hit this. And
Yeah.
not only did he know, but he also, did it and finished it out. Like, he had exactly enough time to do just that to skip round 3.
Yeah, if you look at Zallard's reaction in the video, it's actually really interesting because he was probably the only person that realized what the situation was, man.
Yeah.
didn't have all the information as viewers, so yeah, that's pretty wild. For Sinister, I don't know, I can't remember when the first time you actually were able to complete a blindfolded run and get through Tyson. What's it like having, because we've seen now kind of the trials and all the work that's been put into it at this point. It's got to feel pretty good, I guess, to finally get to a point where you can do this on this stage and be able to perform like that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to lie. Look, it was a little bit of mixed feelings. Of course, I would have preferred to have won the race, but even having lost it, it was still just such a big kind of relief to get closure, more or less, on this chapter of my blindfolded journey, right? Like
Right.
I kind of started this thing. I wanted to get to the end. And if it had gone down where I did not beat Tyson and that was it, that was the end, like it would have been so hard to live with that, because it's not like I would have got another chance, most likely. I mean, there's no reason after this, there was really no reason to do Punch Out again. I mean, until we found a reason, but that would have been it. And I would have just had to be like, man, I couldn't get it done. So yeah, I was very happy to have been able to complete the run.
Pretty cool. And I think that's a great way to set up where we're going next. And I'm going to go ahead and start this video. This is going to be, so we're going to move forward in time a bit to AGDQ 2020. And many of you may remember this is one of basically the last time we've been able to have a live and in-person event, sad face. But it's also where, I guess the first question is, how did you ever come up with the idea of playing 2 players with 1 controller blindfolded Mike Tyson's Punch Out?
Well, if you can't beat him, join him, right? That's the strat. No, we actually had tried this at 2016 just for the heck of it. We did it in the practice room, and how far did we go, Zallard?
So it's funny because there was that run, yeah, but also remember the Contra conference that you went to?
Well, yeah, we did that. We did but that was not blindfolded though.
Nah, but it was kind of like the reason we even tried it, because of Mr. K and Herblat doing Contra 3 like that. So when we had that opportunity, we tried it there and didn't think much of it. It was like kind of a fun, silly thing. And then at AGDQ 2016, after our race, then we tried it blindfolded, and we, without any coordination or practice, got to Soda Popinski before we kind of lost track of each other.
There's actually a little bit of footage of that online. Someone there recorded like the first 3 or 4 minutes of it. So kind of a precursor to everything.
I do want to give a shout out. There's a wonderful video on Sinister One's YouTube page about behind the scenes and what went into this, where both of y'all are talking through it and giving us some behind the scene details, because it's fascinating to even think something like this is possible, to show you. I mean, because we even just saw in 2016, you were doing some different strats and things like that. So how do you choose whose strat you're going to use? Well, let me take this back just a moment. At this point, the game is, we've had world record changes and people who have done that. Salt, bring us up to speed a little bit on what the game was like at this point, because now we're 4 years later and we've seen new things happen and stuff like that. Could you maybe give us a fill in the history a little bit up in the previous 4 years?
Yeah, well, a few months after that HDQ 2016 run, I took the single segment record. And Zallard and Sinister, they still played the game a little bit, but they weren't, I don't think either of them really grinded the game for a super sustained period of time. They'd come back for a little bit, try to get a PB, and then, move on to the next thing, where for me, I am probably a little bit too obsessed with Punch Out. That's 90% of what I speedrun. So it's I was just able to keep going with it. But on the marathon side of things, Sinister and Zallard were still the guys to do it, and they both had the blindfold experience. I hadn't really done much blindfolded stuff. They had the marathon experience, and yeah, they were able to get together and do something that I don't think anyone expected, but obviously the end result was just ridiculous.
That's just such an understatement. I mean, it's really wild to think that this was even possible, because I know as a viewer and as a fan, I couldn't imagine this even being a thing. Where I was going to go is, I don't know if this should be directed at Zallard or Sinister, but how did you decide whose strats you were going to use, or who was the one? I guess, is there somebody driving the bus? Like, is there somebody making those decisions when you're doing something like this?
It was definitely a team effort. We both went through just a plethora of strategies and kind of weeded out ones that were just like, we can't coordinate this. We need to find something different. And it was kind of scary because most of our practice was like that, where it was just like, you know, we couldn't find strategies that would work all the time, or, you know, something like that. And it would be a bit disheartening. Sinister at one point was considering like canceling the run. Like it wasn't coming together the way that we were imagining it would come together. It was, yeah.
Sinister One, what was holding you back? What was the problems? Like, what were the issues?
Well, what wasn't the problem? I mean, we just weren't getting it done. Despite our best efforts, we weren't able to get through certain fights consistently. We didn't have the right strats. We were getting very close to the marathon. And it was just kind of like a reality check moment of like, you know, hey, we have to be honest about this, man. If we don't think we can pull this off, then we shouldn't be going up on that stage. And you know, thankfully, Zallard was able to find an absolutely critical strategy for Super Macho Man. So I'll let him talk about that.
So one of the problems with Super Macho Man is it's hard for us to gauge where his guard is, like, because Super Macho Man's a really random fight. He'll throw uppercuts, hooks, in some order throughout, you know, the first, you know, couple phases of the fight. And the problem is that you need to know if you're punching him high or low in order to deal damage, get stars, and all that. And if you don't know, then you're not going to be getting much damage in, and you're not going to be getting the stars in. And it's kind of a problem, because if we're off sync, then we fall apart. We just fall apart completely, and the fight is just, it's a disaster. And Macho is also a scary one, because if we lose to Macho, we get sent back 2 fights. We go back to Dawn 2. So it's like, you know, we really, really do not want that.
I can't emphasize enough how much Macho was beating us down before Zallard figured this out.
Yeah, so the trick is, if you duck every attack, which, you know, the duck input is double tapping down. It's not, you know, the typical dodge, which is pretty easy to do. You just hold a, you know, direction. It'll set Macho's guard high every time. And with that, you know, it's like, we know it's going to be low every time. So with that, we can do what we want pretty much.
Is that something where you're just playing around with the game, or you know, breaking the game and noticing that? Like, because that seems like such a thing that you might not know, even in a casual playthrough, it might not be something you're going to pay attention to. You wouldn't put that together. Like, how did you end up finding something like that?
Out of desperation. that's pretty much what fueled it. It's like, I gotta find something on this fight to make this consistent. And, you know, when I ducked, you know, just out of, you know, like playing around with him, like, wait, his guard's up. He threw an uppercut. He threw a hook. It's still up. This is it. So I shared that, I think, with like, I think it was either our second to last or last meeting that me and Sinister had before we went to GDQ, and I'm like, yo, we got something good on Macho. So we started practicing with that. We found a couple of strategies, some of which were really hard to coordinate, but we were getting success every now and again. And it's like, that's all we need. We need it to be possible. We need it to be kind of realistic. So with that, we were just like, okay, we were able to complete a one run, and it was beyond our estimate. Our estimate was 35 minutes, and we finished like a 38-minute run. and that was with like I think either a loss on Macho, a loss on Tyson. It may have been one on each, to be honest. It was bad. But yeah, we were just like, if we're gonna do this, we need the estimate to be higher. So it went from 35 minutes to 40.
Yeah. We had to increase the estimate.
That's still not a lot of completed runs, though, before having to do this in front of thousands of people.
Just one.
One
and it was
completed
not
run.
Great.
Jeez.
With the use of passwords, which we had talked ourselves into thinking like this is acceptable. You know, this is like such a ridiculously hard thing. People will understand if we need to use a password to fight Tyson again, or to fight Macho again, or whatever it was.
Yeah, we had no reservations on that. We were just like, yeah, if we lose to Macho, instead of going to Don 2, we're just gonna, reset, put in the Macho code. And we had to practice the Macho code. I forgot all about this. I was so bad at the code.
On that topic, Salt, and I can't remember which video it was, but in one of your world record progression videos, you mentioned how the developers put these touches in nearly every fight. In nearly every fight, that's an indicator of an action that's something about to happen. Have those discoveries? Are they? Does that exist in every fight, that there is some sort of indication about something that is happening in the game, whether it's a flash or a sound or something like that?
I think that exists in 5 fights. I think both of the Piston Honda fights, both of the Bald Bull fights, and Macho. I don't think any other fights have it, but yeah, the people in the crowd, there's a couple people that do little indicators. Either like when Bull is coming forward with his bull charge and you should punch right when you see them move, or a camera flashes, or that's actually part of the way the Macho soft lock works, is the guy who's doing the cue gets frozen. And anyway, there's these little cues that you can use that, 99.9% of the people playing the game don't pay any attention to them. So it's not like it's a huge, disadvantage that you can't use them when you're doing the game blindfolded. I mean, you don't even get to the point in the game sometimes when you're speedrunning it normally where they come up. But yeah, now there's just little Easter eggs that you can use to your advantage.
I gotta ask, because it's become quite a staple of the blindfolded runs, is the actual blindfold itself. Could you tell us a little bit about the history, or why we've seen the same blindfold from run to run over the years?
Sure. Well, for me, I guess for the very first one, I happened to have this, for those that aren't aware, this is like from the Karate Kid, or maybe you're familiar. There's now a series called Cobra Kai with these same characters. Excellent series, by the way.
Yeah.
But I had this back in 2011. I was like, oh, this is, it's a headband, but this would work as a blindfold too. And it's kind of cool, and it's retro, it's from the 80s. People, they know Mike Tyson's Punch Out. They'll know what Karate Kid is. So I kind of got that and just stuck with it. And ironically, I forgot my blindfold when I passed.
Yes.
So I got to AGDQ, which is in Florida.
Yeah, other side of the country.
And I live in California, and I did not have my blindfold. This was a problem. Very fortunately, I was able to arrange a situation where somebody was able to overnight ship the blindfold to me, and I got it just in time. So thank God for that. Although I think Zallard, I had got you to bring a backup or something, because I had figured it out before you left, maybe.
Yeah, so I had, what was it? I had bought like an identical blindfold to the one, well, first off, the one that I have is the one that Sinister gave me at AGDQ 2014. And I've used it ever since, kind of out of obligation, because at this point, it's accrued so many like really good blindfolded runs that it means a lot to me now. So I had gotten an exact identical one just in case I lose like the original. And I think it was like Discord, like I was packing. I literally was about to shut my suitcase and unplug my computer, and I get a Discord message from Sinister just saying, I forgot my blindfolded, lol. I'm like, oh, I have a spare. Do you need it? And he's like, yeah.
No big deal.
No big deal. But I mean, like Dallard said, the sentimental value of these blindfolds cannot be understated. So I needed to have my blindfold.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
I hope at this point you keep it under lock and key somewhere so that it's like with everything else, it'll be historically preserved at this point.
I got it right here. I got it right here.
Nice.
It's in a bag because it's so old that it's like I can't, even oxygen will damage it at this point. So it's like in a Ziploc bag to preserve it.
You mentioned that you had one successful run before this. So is there any prep or practice happening at the event when you're there and able to do some of that?
Yeah. We had to go through some stuff with that too, because this was the first GDQ that was in this new venue in Florida. And the layout was kind of different, and the way the practice rooms were set up. Normally the practice rooms are like kind of off somewhere a little bit away from all the action, and there's like a private practice room that's like really quiet and you can really get your focus and stuff. That's for runners only. Yeah. But the way this venue was set up, it wasn't really like that. So there was a lot of noise and stuff like that in even the private practice room. So we had to kind of like work through that. And I remember like Zallard was totally chill about it, because he's like, he's kind of more, I think, happy with just doing the practice however, because he's been done it before like that. But for me, I'm like sitting there getting irritated. I'm like, I need quiet. Like, come on, get these people out of here. Like, just like random people coming up to us, like tapping us on the shoulder while we're trying to practice. It's like, dude, can we try to practice, please? But yeah, it was eventually we were able to get our quiet practice.
I love that venue, but as you said, there is no quiet place in there. Even there was a quiet room, quote unquote, it was still, there were other people running. And I mean, there's not a good, easy, quiet place to do some things.
No.
Is there anything that didn't go as planned, or that you were concerned about? Anything not go to the plan?
Yeah, the thing that didn't go to plan is that we completely destroyed the game and got a 15-minute PB. That was not part of the plan.
Yeah, that was the unexpected thing that happened. Yep.
You almost make it look so easy. Once again, I hate to say it like that, because I know that we've talked about it. This is hours, years. I mean, this is an amalgamation of everything happening all at once. But was part of that the practice or the knowledge of the game? Is part of that luck? Like, what makes that possible?
I would say it's kind of both. Like at this point, like both of us know a whole bunch about the game, and both of us have, blindfolded experience, and both of us have been able to successfully do great runs at these marathons. So it just, between all of that, it kind of worked out in a way better than expected, I guess.
I do like how you guys pulled off my Bull 2 strat better when you were combined rather than each separately.
That's the funniest thing about this run, honestly, is that this run beats both of our times from 2016.
Crushes.
Yeah,
crushes it.
It's not even close.
This, I would second kind of what Zallard said. You need some luck. You need all the experience that we have, and you need to. I knew that there was at one point in the run, I knew Zallard was like in the zone. So there's this one part, it's actually on this fight right here, where it's like, it's an inconsequential thing. There's like a movement where, Zallard, normally he would do a gut punch instead of a face punch or something like that, where Don is blocking it anyway. And it loses a little bit of time. It means literally nothing, but Zallard did the right thing, which he had not even done before once. And as soon as that happened, I was just like, oh, I was like, it's over, dude. This game has no chance. If he did that thing, it's over. That was it. It was done.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so awesome.
Yeah, in practice, I always reacted to this incorrectly. And I guess, I don't know, adrenaline or, something. I finally did the thing right. It's right here. Yeah. It's a face jab right here. Usually I would throw another gut punch and it would waste a second.
Yeah.
So
it's
really
not a big deal
matter.
at all.
But the fact that I reacted so quickly and did it correctly, and it just yeah.
Truthfully, it's still a bit mind-boggling to see, because this is, I mean, speedrunners running this game want to aspire to get these times that you're getting with this, with the blindfolded on and everything. It's kind of wild that it just looks like, I mean, it doesn't look like there's anything that's not syncing up. It seems like literally it's like one mind almost. And that comes across on the screen, which was quite surprising as well.
Yeah, we were both playing pretty well that day. I had to like try to get myself back into the moment a few times, because it was going so well that I was like thinking ahead of how, like, oh my gosh, we're just gonna beat the game, and I was like, all right, calm down. We're still only on this fight. Like, we need to get there. But it was just like I almost couldn't contain my excitement of how well it was going.
This is a good question in the chat, and that is, whose cart did you play on, and did that matter at all?
I think we played on my cart.
I think so.
Because there's always been that that stigma where you're just like, your cart doesn't have a great luck, and mine does somehow.
Yes.
Power of 4A.
4A cart.
Whose controller?
My controller, because the D-pad is awful.
Yes.
And I can actually use it, so.
Yeah, Zallard is on the D-pad. Yeah, the D-pad is what matters. The buttons are buttons. D-pad needs to be right.
Yeah.
It's so interesting how that can actually impact it. And as speedrunners, we definitely, I mean, I've got 10 controllers, it's like there's never ending amount that you have to keep, just as you go through controllers a lot quicker. And so I assume this is the one that you practiced on as well. You made sure because that's, it's those D-pads, the rubbers and everything, that could feel different and totally change things.
Yeah, mine is like just so worn in that, it's easier for me to do like all of the, quick dodges like in this fight, or like the ducks on Macho. Like, it's just very comfortable, so ended up just going with that.
Sinister, from the button perspective side of things, are you faking, or are you in your head, are you thinking what the D-pad inputs are doing? Like, how does this work, like just from a thinking through it process?
Yeah, I mean, I have to know all the strategies perfectly. I have to know exactly what Zallard is doing, and obviously we communicated a lot about this, and well, what do we do in this situation? What do we do in this? We had contingency plans after backup plans after everything. Like, we had it all down, and we would just drill that. And like, we would even just try to take things from weird situations and just be like, all right, let's practice from this weird situation and see what happens. So we were really well prepared in that regard, I think, in terms of like knowing what we wanted to do. Now, actually, the actual execution of that and the game cooperating, that's different. But we at least had a plan. We had a solid plan for everything.
We haven't talked about it yet, but we had mentioned some of the tech issues running this game blindfolded in the past. I assume at this point now, all you can hear is each other and the game. Are you able? Can you detect what's in the crowd and that vibe coming from them?
Yeah,
I was able. Yeah, go ahead. Use that, Zallard. You go first.
Okay. So since this wasn't a race, it was kind of back to 2014 rules, where in between stuff, the crowd can do whatever they want.
Okay.
And yeah, all we could hear was each other and the game. That was it.
I would say that I could hear the commentators a little bit, but I let it slide this time. I was like, look, last time I had them turn the volume up way too loud, and I don't want to do that again. So I'll just deal with it this time. It was minimal. Like, I could barely hear them, and it was, again, just like what Zallard said from before, of like, it was only during times when the game itself was probably quiet, so I don't think it mattered too much.
Yeah, I think now that you mention it, yeah, I do remember it a tiny bit, but yeah, it was pretty inconsequential.
And the crowd, I mean, you want to hear the crowd, because like Zallard said, they're only cheering in between fights, so it's that gets you pumped up, so that's helpful.
Well, it's definitely, folks. I know we haven't had in-person events, but seeing runs like this, there's really being in the crowd at the time is a really unique experience. It almost feels like people are holding their breath and then just ready to let loose at something happening, and hopefully it does, and thankfully it did. I want to touch upon one more thing, and Salt, this one's directed at you as somebody who is so appreciative and passionate about the history of this game and the community and the speedrun around it. Did you ever, in your wildest imagination, think like something like this might even be possible for this game?
I mean, it's something I never really even considered. Like, I can see how it would be possible, knowing what I know about the game and how blindfolded stuff works. But, seeing how it's possible and then actually doing it live at GDQ first try without losing when you had never done it before, beating your PB by 15 minutes. Like, I can go on and on here. Like, the fact that all of that lined up was kind of ridiculous. And that's what's so remarkable about all of it.
There is a category for a blindfolded run nowadays, and have we seen any evolutions, or are people continuing to do that, or is that just kind of like a nice historical place for things to rest? Is there a community around that?
There's a few people that play blindfolded. MPAP is kind of the most notable person to play it, but he hasn't ran it in a few years now. I've beaten the game blindfolded before myself, but problem is to get like your run on the leaderboard, you need to be using like a face cam and everything, and I mean, I'm not really doing that right now. So yeah, and I've beaten Tyson blindfolded too, done that in round 1. So there's like a few things that people still do blindfolded, but I would say it's not as active as the rest of the community.
And that makes some sense, some of the rules that are around there, but pretty cool that that's where the game is at, that there actually is still a place if that's something you want to pursue and things like that.
Yeah.
Anything go awry here for the punch out for the Tyson fight? It's looking pretty good so far. Oh,
yes. Okay. Zallard actually was playing too well. I had to tell him to calm down a little bit. So in the first round, you actually don't want to hit Tyson too much. And normally that wasn't a problem because dodging his hooks are the timing's a little bit random, so it's actually very hard to dodge the hooks. But Zallard was dodging like every hook. He was like Neo in the Matrix at this point, and I'm like, all right, dude, we gotta just like let's just block a couple times or do something because we can't keep hitting him. Because you need a certain amount of health to have round 2 work out the way you want it to. But that was the only thing that went wrong, if you want to say.
Yeah. Basically, you want a certain amount of health to skip the blinking patterns that Tyson does at 1:30 and 2:30. But I mean, we've skipped this one, and that's all we needed because everything else went right. So, it's pretty much just pressing the buttons and winning at this point because we have the 2 stars and we just have to land them.
It's really interesting to see, and I'm glad we've had this chance in this moment to go through. I mean, at this point, it's 10 years of speedruns of Mike Tyson's Punch Out at such a great moment. Sorry, you guys get so excited. It was really great. I mean, you almost got to wonder at this point, is there anything left? I mean, it doesn't seem like, I mean, at that point, this is, you've hit the kind of the epitome.
Yeah, the thing people always bring up is with no audio and blindfolded is like the final frontier, but I'm not sure how we're gonna pull that one off, but that's next time you see, in AGDQ 2026 or whatever, that's the next thing, I guess. So
I have an idea, and I don't want to bring it up. I think I sent it to you, Sinister. I'll have to let you know after. So
wow, folks, you heard it here first.
Okay.
There's an idea.
This is something else, guys.
That we could consider.
Okay. All right.
Nice. I think I'd be remiss to ask because Zallard, I've noticed you've been doing some Tyson attempts recently. Sinister, just a few months ago, I remember you doing some attempts of things. I'm going to throw this one over to Salt because from the historical perspective, what's left? I mean, even for the game, just from a speedrunning perspective, I mean, what can we still do? This game has been quite optimized, but I assume there's still things left.
Yeah, there's like a few different approaches to take. If you're just talking about Mike Tyson, the world record is 2 minutes 0.97. The task time is 158.61. So really the goal for humans is just to get as close to that as you can. But I mean, we're already reaching a point where getting a personal best by more than a few frames is like not really, or getting like a new record by more than a few frames is like not really reasonable. For single segment, the record's at 1455. We figured out some RNG manipulation we can do to help a little bit. So taking that to like the 1440s or maybe a bit lower could happen. It's so hard to say like the future of games because a lot of times what you think the boundaries are put on their head a few years later by something completely new. So yeah, I mean, it's hard to say, but Punch Out is a really random, very variable fight length sort of game where so much can happen to gain you or lose you time. So there's always going to be some potential there.
Sinister, you know, thinking back to that time period when you first watched Andrew G take on this game as an incentive, a $25 donation incentive, did you ever think at that point that you might be in a situation where you're playing to hundreds of thousands of people blindfolded with another person sitting next to you? I mean, did you ever foresee any of this type of evolution happening with the game and the popularity of it?
Couldn't have imagined it in my wildest dreams. My single thought was like, I would like to get a speed run of this game onto Speed Demos Archive, so there's an actual video of, you know, somebody beating this, and then other people will be able to, you know, watch it and get some enjoyment from it. That was it.
And of course, Zallard, having basically done, it seems like every Punch-Out game blindfolded, pretty cool to see where it's come from. I mean, when you started running this game, did you ever think you might be on that stage doing what you did that last time at AGDQ 2020?
No. Not even close.
It's pretty cool. I think it's awesome too that you still have ideas for this game. That's the one thing I think it's kind of interesting too for all of you, that whether you're not running it every day, you're not speedrunning it every day, but there seems to be something about it that brings you back because you're still trying to do those attempts. And maybe Assault alluded to it, that getting that perfect RNG or getting what you need to get that best time.
Well, what brought me back is I had never actually completed what we in the community call a perfect Tyson. That it doesn't actually mean it's the fastest time. It just means that you hit all of the frame perfect punches, which is difficult to do. And by the time that I actually got around to it, I think there had been 12 or 13 other people had already done it.
Oh, interesting.
But I wanted to do it. You know, I was like, hey, I've been playing this game so long, man. I should do this milestone. So that's kind of what brought me back. And in a way, that's what brought Zallard back too.
Yeah.
I noticed doing the attempts again. Are you going for the perfect Tyson as well, Zallard?
Well, technically, yes. I mean, it's a different flavor of perfect Tyson that I've not done myself, where you get a uppercut in the third phase, which requires ridiculous luck and, you know, also perfect execution. I got kind of close. I think it was like a stream or two ago, where I got a 125, which is the time you need to get him to throw the uppercut, but it was too high. I needed to save a couple frames somewhere via either better execution or a better pattern. So I missed it by a little bit.
Since nobody's told the story yet of why Zallard is doing Tyson,
fine.
Yeah.
I didn't want to say anything. I mean, you know.
Sinister's doing his perfect Tyson attempts, and he's doing them from a save state at the start of the fight, which you're not going to get the run on the leaderboard if you do that. But if all you care about is just completing the fight, which I guess is all Sinister cared about doing,
that's all I wanted to do.
This way, you don't have to put the password in. You could just rapid fire attempts. So, you know, I waltz into Sinister's chat, and Zallard's hanging out, and I ask Zallard, hey man, when are you going to do Tyson phase 3 uppercut attempts? Because that's like the next PB Zallard could get, is doing it with the phase 3 uppercut. And Zallard goes, all right, I'll do it if Sinister gets a perfect fight from the password, because he hasn't been doing password attempts. And keep in mind, at this point, Sinister had been doing Tyson attempts for probably at least 3 or 4 weeks, maybe a month. And he had mostly been doing them from a save state, and he hadn't gotten a perfect fight yet. So Sinister goes, all right, let's do some attempts from the password. And about 20 or 25 minutes later, Sinister gets his first perfect fight from the password. And now Zallard has to do phase 3 uppercut attempts, and that's what he's been doing for a few weeks.
Yep.
Hey, what can I say? Zallard gave me all the motivation I needed, man.
Yeah,
thank you, Zallard. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Right on cue. Well, thank you all three for sharing this history and giving us this behind-the-scenes taste of what it took to just even make any of these things possible. We do have a bonus segment for those. We're going to take a quick break, but we will have a bonus segment for those that are interested. Zallard has been kind enough, and I think Sinister is going to stick on with us, and we're going to talk a little bit about the blindfolded Wii Punch-Out version that went down at SGDQ 2019. But before we go, I have a huge thanks to give to all three of you. But also, I want to. Summoning Salt's going to leave us at the break. But thank you so much for providing such an interesting. I mean, your historical knowledge on this game and a lot of other speedrunning is just invaluable. And appreciate that somebody like you is taking the time to catalog and to make this history important and make it sure it's preserved and things like that. Because we don't, like as you mentioned, there's not all the knowledge is still out there. The internet is a place where sometimes things go down and we might lose info. So the fact that you're doing all of this work, really do appreciate it. And thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. If a quick shout out, if people aren't familiar with your work, I don't know why they wouldn't be at this point, where can people find your stuff and find world record progression videos?
Find me on YouTube at Summoning Salt. That's where you're going to find most of my work. If you like watching streams of people unwrapping penny rolls from about 50 or 60 years ago, check me out on Twitch at Summoning Salt. And every now and then you might see me pop up there. And yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. I mentioned to you before, two of my favorite things in the world, speedrunning history and Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. And we just combined them for a good 2.5, 3 hours here. So this was a lot of fun. So thank you.
And I got to say, folks, we were talking about it before we went live. He's kidding. He's not kidding about the penny stuff. It's really been fascinating. It's a great stream. If you haven't watched it, I've really been enjoying that content. So just throw it out there. It's really pretty great stuff.
Yeah, it's fun stuff.
Really
Definitely.
is. So thank you so much, Salt. Folks, don't go anywhere. We're going to take just a short break. And when we come back, our last segment, we are going to revisit SGDQ 2019 and Zallard1's Wii Blindfolded Punch-Out Run. Don't go anywhere. And welcome back to Games Done Classic, where we are looking back at legendary GDQ moments with the legends that made them happen. And folks, we're going to do a bonus here. We've been talking about Mike Tyson's Punch-Out this entire stream and this entire episode. As a little bit of a bonus, it's possible. Okay, this is kind of a selfish thing. I'm just going to be honest with y'all. The blindfolded Wii Punch-Out run that Zallard1 did at SGDQ 2019 is probably my favorite run I've ever seen at a GDQ. And so I asked if Zallard wouldn't mind, and Sinister wouldn't mind sticking on for one more run to go through this, because first of all, it's a really interesting run in that there's not a lot of people who run this game. So I think, I feel like maybe a lot of us had not seen something like this before. And so I guess that's where I kind of want to start, Zallard. Before we'll get into the blindfolded thing, can you describe the Wii Punch-Out community? Are there many people running this game? Are you one of the few? Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I mean, with Wii Punch-Out in particular, the origins of it kind of go, it's a little bit similar to MTPO, where people prioritize single fights. Single fights were like the thing that people ran with this game for, years and years. It ended up being that I was the first person to put together something that you would say is a speed run of this game, from start to finish. For the singular purpose of submitting to Speed Demos Archive. And it was just like, I wanted to see a speed run of this game, and no one had done it. Like, no one had put together all the strategies that the community had found, and I wanted to see it.
It's a real interesting game, and I believe that you had run it at GDQ before, right? I'm not blindfolded, but like the speed run of it.
Yeah, so I ran it at AGDQ 2015 with Vision, and that was a fun run in and of itself, but a bit different in being able to see all these so one of the big challenges of this game, and you kind of saw it there, was the motion controls. Every menu in the game requires this pointer that you point to the screen with, but it's something so trivial when you can see, but when you can't, then it becomes this weird dowsing exercise that you're constantly trying to figure out okay, am I on the right line, am I gonna pick the right boxer? And it's really challenging and kind of frightening. In some ways it's scarier than the fights themselves. It is that important.
And I do have a fair amount of questions about all that. If we can take it just one step back really quick, in that, I played through the game now casually. How does the game control or play compared to Mike Tyson's Punch-Out or Super Punch-Out, games you've run before in the series?
So the cool thing outside of the pointer controls is you can take the Wiimote, turn it on its side, and you'll feel right at home. It's just the two buttons, the D-pad, the only thing that's a little bit different is the A button is Star Punch, and that's a little bit closer to the D-pad. So you'll be using Star Punches with your left finger instead of your right finger. But all in all, it controls pretty much as you would expect. There's a couple of differences in terms of movement. In Mike Tyson's Punch-Out and Super Punch-Out, you get this thing called quick dodges, where you just have to press left and up, and it'll make Mac center faster. There's technically a glitch where quick dodges exist in this, but that's like a whole other can of worms, but I mention it just for completeness sake. But between that and the frame data being more, so like every single dodge and duck are the exact same number of frames as each other, and the same with punches. That makes it really scary for buffer strategies, because you're super limited on what you can do. With MTPO and Super Punch-Out, you have, like different dodge types, quick dodges, punches, high and low could have different, numbers of frames that elapse. With this game, if it doesn't fit, a combination of some dodge and some punch, it's not going to work. So there's a whole bunch of just manually timing counters, and if you miss them, then you're kind of in trouble. It really depends on the fight, but it's super scary if you go off script in the later fights in this game,
which thankfully we're going to get to in a little bit. I want to throw a question out at Sinister, who, I primarily familiar with a lot of your NES speedruns. Did you ever try playing through casually or speedrunning any other games in the Punch-Out series after Mike Tyson's Punch-Out? Like, did you ever play this one or anything like that?
I did play this one. A stream viewer of mine had actually very graciously sent me a Wii with this game, because they want to see me play it on stream, and I tried to get some coaching from Zaller during the stream, I think, because I was struggling, and I think I got to Soda Popinski, and maybe I beat him, maybe I didn't, I don't know, but it was short-lived. Super Punch-Out, yes, I did actually play that quite a bit, and I did speedrun one of the individual levels for that. I actually had a tied world record in one level, but no, I never got to the level that Zaller did in these other games. Zaller basically, he is Mr. Punch-Out, okay? The entire franchise, if there is a Punch-Out game or a game that is meant to be like Punch-Out, like Breakfast Brawl, like Zaller is crushing that game, okay? Check out Breakfast Brawl if you don't know what that is, by the way, it's funny.
The classic that is Breakfast Brawl. So at some point, Zallard, when did you think that you might be able to do what you're doing here? Attempt or a blindfold? I mean, where did this idea come from with this game?
Well, Super Punch-Out had been beaten at GDQ blindfolded. Then MTPO was beaten blindfolded at a GDQ. And for many years, I didn't really want to get to this game, because it's way longer than the other Punch-Out games. It's 26 different fights that you have to do. So it's a very daunting kind of run to prepare for a marathon. And I think it was at the start of 2019, I had tried submitting this game to the GDQs, and it didn't quite make it for AGDQ 2019. Probably, if I had to take a guess, due to schedule reasons, because it is, one of the longer games I've ever submitted. And I was very pleasantly surprised when it made it for SGDQ 2019. And that was when it was just like, all right, well, it's time to do the thing. It's time to complete the trilogy.
Had you done attempts before? It's like, you know, we know the traditional submitting a game nowadays, and so I assume you had to have done some attempts at this game blindfolded before you submit something like that.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing before I even began to submit this run to GDQs was to kind of verify to myself that yes, I can beat the game blindfolded. And it's more just like I wanted to make sure that it was consistent enough, so I would find a couple of strategies here and there for some fights that were really, really problematic. Like the refight with Soda Pop is really bad. Aaron Ryan in the refights is pretty bad. Great Tiger. There's a couple of fights where it was just like if I don't get the optimal strat, then I'm kind of screwed in a sense. Like the refight with Great Tiger is a fight where it's 100% consistent until you make one mistake, and then suddenly it becomes super random, and you need to be able to see to dodge correctly or counter correctly. It's one of those things. That's why I was kind of, you know, constantly going like, hey, this is really bad if I mess up, you know, and everyone's just like, he says that all the time. All right. And it's like, no, really though.
Well, yeah, can I just add something
please.
to that? Because I think people, if you haven't done these things before, the blindfolded runs and stuff like that, it has been kind of almost like a fluke in the way that Zallard has performed in these blindfolded runs of how well he's done in the one chance you get on stage at GDQ, and people are just like, oh yeah, it's probably. But it's like it is so hard, and if you're able to watch in the practice room or see other attempts, then you get a better understanding and appreciation for like, oh wow, there are like a lot of things that can actually go wrong.
Yeah, like I was feeling terrible for this run, like super terrible about it, because I was just like in the practice room right before this run, I was just like, well, I can't beat, you know, Great Tiger right now. That's not good. Let's try title defense Soda Pop. Oh, that's not good. Let's try. All right, well, I'm gonna go on stage in an hour. This is not good. You know, it's just like.
Zal, that's so important to talk about, because I remember bumping into you in the halls before you had done the run, and you were talking to having the nerves and the whole thing, and it was, you know, as a person who's been just a fan of seeing all these things, I was like, oh wow, it's not just a given that you're going to destroy this game.
Oh no.
And, you know, it's almost an unfair, you know, to hold somebody to that standard, because while there's a lot of things that have to happen for this to go right, for this to work. So it made sense that I'm like, no, of course you'd be. I'm not even attempting something like this, but that I'm not surprised to hear that it was nerve-wracking, especially if things weren't going the way that you were planning them to go in the practice room.
Yeah, I mean, with how practice was going, I was just like, yeah, this could be the one, you know, like, you know, it was great while it lasted, you know, the flukes of Super Punch Out and Mike Tyson's Punch Out going so well, blindfolded like before, but this is it. I'm gonna be exposed with this run, and everyone's gonna see how it really is, and then it just didn't happen.
Well, that would be, you know, you talked about it here, and I assume that these blindfolded strats, you're pretty much the one coming up with these. I can't imagine anybody else was doing this, the limited amount of runners to begin with this game.
Yeah, so for the most part, I was trying to follow just sort of the basic speedrun of sorts, and just kind of, you know, going off muscle memory and just like kind of internal timing in my head for certain punches, you know, and that has like, you know, hit or miss issues, you know, so to speak. And, you know, like for this fight's like a 27-second fight if everything goes right, but I've already made like, you know, a big error, and I'm gonna make like a couple of other ones after. And you know, there's a fight here and there that's kind of like that in this run. But yeah, yeah, I was not feeling this run when it was, you know, about time.
We touched upon
for
it.
me to pull it off.
We talked about it for a moment, and it actually reminds me of a question I should ask about the 2-player 1-controller Mike Tyson's Punch-Out submission. Being that you had never done it or completed a run, how do you end up submitting something like the 2-player 1-controller? And I'll throw it over to Sinister. If you know, how do you pitch that to part of the submission process and getting a game in, like if you haven't done it yet?
Well, first of all, it was really Zallard's idea that we should do it anyway. So
Yeah.
he convinced me, and I said, okay, sure, let's submit it. And I don't know exactly how. I mean, you'd have to get the games committee to tell you what the actual answer is, but I would assume that it, to some degree, that we have built up kind of a level of trust, given our body of work in previous blindfolded gaming endeavors at GDQ, that they were like, yeah, they can probably do that. So that, they're kind of like blindly trusting us to be able to do it. But then that, again, it comes back to, that's why I, toward the end, as Zallard had mentioned, that I had to think about, hey, we might need to cancel this. And then eventually we had to extend the estimate. So yeah.
Yeah, it was funny now that you mentioned that, because I remember exactly when I pitched it to you. It was the airplane ride away from this marathon.
That's right.
Because
oh wow,
the reason why was at that point, because spoilers, I beat this game without losing a single fight. So it transformed like my goal of like, so I had like kind of this goal that I wanted to hit initially, and it was to beat every Punch-Out game at a GDQ blindfolded. And with this run, I did it. And well, at least as far as like the console games, I haven't done the arcade ones yet. Maybe we'll figure that out later, maybe. But
there it is. You heard it here first, folks. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
But for this, having gotten the perfect streak through this game, I was just like, let's try beating all the Punch-Outs blindfolded without losing a single fight in a row. So I ended up submitting Super Punch-Out to GDQ Express right after this run. I believe it was the 2019 one, yeah. And I did the same thing there, and then the 2-player 1-controller one happened, and completed the goal. It's all done.
Goal achieved. There, Clage, once again on the couch, mentioned something at the beginning of this run that it has now become kind of the staple here, where it's you need to hear the audio, so asking the audience to keep it quiet during the fights. But he alludes to, and you mentioned it too, how important the audio cues are in this game. Are they even more important than some of the previous blindfolded runs we had seen? Because that seems like a big aspect of this whole thing.
Yeah, so in this game, it's funny because you would think that there's more audio cues for this game, and there kind of is in some respect, but some of the comfortable audio cues from previous Punch-Outs are absent. So like when you throw a punch and it whiffs, you can't hear it, or it's like so like minutely there. It almost just feels or like sounds like wind. It's so particular, and that's why I was just kind of like, yeah, I need to hear like everything. So, and that comes into play with a couple of other fights where like, maybe the opponent would be like yelling or something. And it's like, but I need to hear this kind of, quiet punch noise in the midst of all this like noise pollution. So it's a bit terrifying, and it's just like, trying to like hone in on these particular sounds and try to like tune out everything else, if that makes any sense.
We had just watched it on screen, and you've mentioned it already, but I think it can't be understated how important menuing is to the blindfolded run. It's actually one of the things that seems to ends up being one of the most challenging things. What makes the menuing so challenging during a blindfolded run like this?
Well, with the practice that I've had with the menus, there's just a lot that you need to remember and make sure to avoid. Like, some screens will have some buttons in different spots. Like let's say, I think it's at the end of the contender, which is like the first half of the game. when you beat Sandman, which is the final fight of the first half, there's going to be like the 3 boxers that you could highlight, an arrow that's kind of under the right boxer that points to the middle to go to Sandman, because it's like 5 boxers in the final circuit. And then you have 3 buttons on the bottom that are like options, continue, and back. And it's like, if I hit anything incorrectly, then I have to be like, oh god, okay, all right, I didn't hit the right thing. What do I think I hit? And, you know, try to navigate backward to get back to that point and do that. I've had a couple of scenarios where if I go into options, I've had to unblindfold and get out of options like that. So that's why there's like a very close call at one point. I think it's the title defense Dawn fight, where I almost hit the options button, and everyone, because I had told my my commentators, at least Mecha and Clage, about like, yeah, options are bad. You never want to see me in options. So they knew the threat of it.
I remember that being a big part of this, and if I could be misremembering this, but I believe your TV was turned off too in front of you, like you was blindfolded as it can get. Is that accurate? I can't remember.
So this is from secondhand stuff, because someone had taken a picture of what the setup looked like. It was a laggy, apparently, monitor where it was like all stretched out and terrible, but like it was for the couch. And it was to the point where, like, at least, you know, what Mecha and Clage were telling me, it was to the point where if I were to look at it, it probably would have messed me up harder than if I had just been blindfolded.
Right.
So yeah.
There's actually a great question in the chat, and we should actually address this, because this game does have some slightly different mechanics that we saw in all of the Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. And the question was, how come the star KO punches and sometimes the TKOs, like what are some of the differences with the way that the star punches, and why are some boxers going down at moments that, you know, their energy is getting fully drained and everything? How does this work? Right.
So this game, I mean, there are instant knockdowns in Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, but they're a little bit different. In this game, there's like certain opportunities that are kind of hidden, where if you use a star punch at a very specific time, or if you punch a very specific frame window, opponents can go down in one hit. And it's more just like a trial and error thing of like trying to figure out like what's what. You know, at least for me, you know, all this stuff has been, you know, found out years and years ago by you know, several people, including myself. I found a couple of these back when the game came out, even. Funnily enough, Jack Wedge found the most, and I hadn't really realized why he was so good at finding punch-out strategies until way later, when it was like, oh, he's speedrun, MTPO, and super punch-out in the super old days. So it kind of came full circle in being like, you know, he's come back to give us the final solution for Tyson.
Good old Jack Wedge. You can always count on him.
Yeah. But yeah, so at least with this game, when, like, let's say, you know, sometimes there's punches that you throw where they'll just be instantly KO'd, and that's just kind of a mechanic in this game. And it's on a fight-by-fight basis.
When I played through the game casually, I had 1 or 2 of them, and it seemed like it occurred to me randomly. But then seeing you play the game, it seems like there were some setups that you had developed or created or had been discovered that where you could find some consistency, and even more so with through a blindfolded run. Were there any that you tried to hit that you didn't get, where you had to, you know, try something, you know, account for that or try a different strat?
Yeah. So there is. It's kind of funny because this ended up being like something that backfired so badly, and it's the refight with Bald Bull. I was so greedy. I was trying to go for like a sub-minute fight. There's actually a strategy you can do where you can carry 3 stars to the bull charge and KO him instantly with that. But in practice, I was just like, nah, no, I'm getting sub-minute like every time. I'm just try that instead. It'll be hype. And then it was hype, but it was a different reason. It was just like, you know, oh God, he's gonna lose. This is it. This is the big one. He's not gonna make it. And I just pull just like a total win out of nowhere on that fight, and it is weirdly the most memorable part of the run for a lot of people.
It really is, because we understood what was going on. At least that's the way I felt in the audience. And somebody who wasn't familiar with the speedrun, I'm like, oh, this, how is this happening? You know, you did a good job of selling us that, you know, and not selling us, but it was the truth that how, you know, this could really go wrong really quickly. So,
yeah, I guess it's sort of like the peak in like, oh, he's not lying though.
Yes, it really, he's not kidding, folks. I have to ask, because this comes up quite often about the couch experience and what it's like to sit on the couch while you're watching some of these things. Sinister, I guess my first question would be like, was it nice to actually finally watch one of these as opposed to having to go through the stress of performing at this level?
Well, yeah, I've been very fortunate that I've been on the couch for Zallard's AGDQ 2014 Super Punch Out, for this run, for his Games Done Quick Express Super Punch Out race against Hootie that he mentioned. Yeah, pretty much all of Zallard's Punch Out related runs. I've been lucky enough to have a front row seat, and you know, hey, if you haven't seen any of them, you might want to go watch because they're all amazing. So,
absolutely incredible. Yes.
Yeah, it's nice to just sit back and watch the man work and just be like, yeah, that's not supposed to happen. This is insane. Like, just to to be like, oh yeah, like what you know, I accidentally got a frame perfect counter, stuff like that. Yeah. You're just like, okay, he's got this.
When you're prepping for that couch seat, did you watch Zallard do any of this before? Like, had you know, what's kind of some of the research or some of the things you had to do to prep to be able to at least hopefully speak somewhat, you know, knowledgeable on the game?
Actually, I don't think I had to say very much for this one. I really think that Zallard had gotten Clage and Mecha very well prepared to talk about it, and I'm not nearly as familiar with this game anyway. So for me, it was really just kind of taking it in, and Zallard was, you know, nice enough to invite me to be able to get a front row seat. So I was like, heck yeah, I want to check this out. Let's go.
Don't want to miss that. Did you have to, you know, Zallard, did you have to prep commentary at all with Mecha and Clage? Like, there were some things that needed to be said and stuff like this for, like, you know, the performance standpoint so we could understand what was going on?
Yeah, I mean, constantly I was showing them, you know, like, here's what happens when things go wrong. So, you know, all of that obviously didn't really come through. But
yeah, it was all just wasted
all
time.
Wasted
time,
energy.
Yeah. But, you know, I had them prepared in case, you know, like something went wrong. Like I missed, you know, the Hippo KO in the refight, or like, you know, I had them be prepared like, oh yeah, he's restarting on Great Tiger because this part's random and this stuff is, you know, you can't really do it blindfolded if you mess up once. And it's just like, well, just scrap that, move on to the next fight to talk about, oh, he just, all right. It's just kept happening like that.
I do have, there's an interesting note from Railgun again, once again, behind the scenes that that you were so far underestimate, they were actually concerned that the next runner might not be around to get in on time. They might be chilling somewhere, so they might have to fill some time. So if that's not a compliment, I don't know what it is. But
I should have just pulled out Doc Lewis's Punch Out because it never gets in, and I should have just done that real quick and just been like, dang,
that was the chance.
That would have been the.
You missed your opportunity.
I missed it.
You guys mentioned during the MTPO 2-player 1 controller that you had really only completed run of it before doing it on the stage. How many times had you completed this run at this point? Because I assume at some point there was an estimate, so you got to figure out if that's. But how many runs had you completed?
With this, it was quite a bit of a handful, but you know, none of them were perfect. That's the thing. None of them had no losses. So it was kind of a similar situation where it's just like this exceeded all expectations, and I didn't, you know.
Zallard is clutch, ladies and gentlemen. If you haven't picked up on that so far, when it's showtime, he's on.
I mean, Zalad, is it? I know it's tough to like quantify that into words and stuff like that, but what's the difference when you get there on stage? Because there is something about that you seem to be able to find that gear and do the thing. And is it an adrenaline? I mean, maybe you could, is there any way to verbalize why that happens while you're on stage there?
I don't really know. Like, it's so weird because I'm just like on stage, just being like, yeah, I'm terrified. Yeah, I'm gonna do bad. And then I don't meet that low expectation by doing the complete opposite, and it just keeps happening. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Well, I do. I think that's one thing I want to really drive home, and that especially because after bumping into you that hallway that one time, like it's not BS. You're really concerned that things could go horribly wrong, and it's like because they do.
I can confirm this. Okay, I've been around Zallard ahead of a lot of these runs, ones that we've shown and ones that we haven't, and he is usually like very concerned about how it's about to go. And in fact, before our 2 players 1 controller run, it was like this stark contrast where I'm like laying down with headphones on, listening to music, trying to get in the zone. And Zallard's like, oh man, this isn't going to go well. Like, we get this Macho and this and Tyson. And like, it's just so funny. And then all of a sudden he sits down and it's just like, boom. It's like, he's a different person all of a sudden. He's just like, yep, I got this. No problem. Crushing everybody.
It's just still an amazing thing, and I think that's why so many people speak so fondly of these runs that we've seen from yeah, and from both of you, to be honest with you, about what the blindfolded and the level of skill it takes to do so, and also the RTA runs of it. I'm going to skip ahead here, and I do want to touch upon a little bit briefly before we wrap, before we finish, about the title defense and what makes that so. What makes title defense, first of all, challenging as a speed run without the blindfold, and then actually adding that extra element. Could you maybe perhaps describe or tell us a little bit about those details?
Yeah, so title defense is well, at least for the speedrun, it's one of those things where it's like, did you hit the strategy? No, then reset. And it's just like the one like saving grace about this run is that it's like 99% not random if you do everything right. So, there's that element of like, okay, I know he's going to do this. I know he's going to do that. I know the timing for this. I know the timing for that. So it's like, a lot of these fights are just like, he's just winning. I don't know. But then, when you finally see me mess up something, it's just like, I'm panicking. Like, I think for title defense soda, I think I did, what was it? I missed 1 punch, or like I mistimed something, and I was just like, oh no, the punch pattern's going to be different. Like, everything's going to go wrong. And then it didn't. And then with title defense bull, it's like, well, I don't know what he's doing now. He's doing a lot of uppercuts, apparently. I can hear it because Mac is on the ground. It's just like, it's, as long as everything goes right, it's all good. One thing goes wrong, then it's bad.
So, you mentioned, we talked about it a little bit, about some of the things that did go wrong. And let's start with, had you had those happen in practice where you at least knew how to kind of deal with it in a certain way, or were you just planning on restarting the fight? What was like the game plan to kind of approach that?
So what I was doing was I was throwing down like intentional mistakes. Like, I think I'm going to make this mistake, so let's find a strategy to branch off of if that happens. So I was doing that a lot, and it's, almost none of that really came into this run. And of course, like, in practice, I'm like super consistent on title defense bull, and I'm like, all right, well, I don't need backups for this apparently. And then no, I'm wrong.
Yeah.
So it was really just like me kind of like scraping the bottom of the barrel of like, I remember this part of this fight a little bit, so I predict that he's gonna do this, and then he doesn't, and every once in a while I get it right, but yeah.
I have seen you from time to time continue to run this game since seeing you perform it here at SGDQ 2019. Is it a game you keep coming back to, similar to the are there things you'd still like to do with the game at this point, RTA or blindfold or something like that?
Yeah, I haven't done single segment runs of this since like 2014, which is a very long time ago. I'd like to improve my my PB on that eventually, but it's, you know, like I kind of want to get through some of the aisles a little bit before I consider that. But I think you know, it would be interesting to see like what the run could be like for me if, you know, I implement the newer things that have been found since.
I've seen this comment come up a couple of times in chat, and I've seen it before where we love certain games and we're not always quite sure why they're not as popular as other games are. And I can say one of the things that's interesting about the Punch-Out series in general is that they're some of the most highly viewed videos on GDQ's YouTube channel. The room, I don't know if you can tell, but the runs that I've been in the room for, packed. You know, you can't find a seat. A lot of people standing, things like that. There is something that is so enjoyable about watching and being a part of the experience of seeing this, that not necessarily everyone wants to go and actually try doing the thing itself, because you see people like yourself and Sinister One performing at such a high level. I have to imagine, being that you guys have all been in the room now for all of these runs, I mean, they're some of the most popular runs I see, like just as far as like attending to watch. I assume you got to notice some of the crowd as this is happening, right?
Yeah, I mean, that definitely, it's funny because at first, you know, it always makes me nervous. I'm like, wow, that's a lot of people, you know. But you know, I put on the blindfold, it's like I can't see no people no more.
Right.
It's
just the game.
It helps having it's actually one advantage of having the blindfold is that it kind of helps you to tune out everything else around you versus being in the room. Because, you know, for those of you that haven't done a run at Games Done Quick, like there's a lot going on the stage. There's like a bunch of TVs, there's this, there's that, there's the people, you know, there's the tech people in the background. Like there's a lot of kind of distractions and stimuli going on. So the blindfold kind of just shuts all that off. You're able to just focus on your audio cues, your commentators, hear the crowd, and that's it. But yeah, the rooms do definitely get packed for these runs. I remember one of the best parts of our run in 2020 was like when we did finally get to take the blindfolds off and we both kind of stood up, and when we like looked and it was like, whoa, this room is really full.
Yeah.
That was cool.
Yeah, definitely.
Easily say standing room only, and hearing the crowd come to life. That's one of those things where, especially during this run, but being all of them, you know, you're asked to stay quiet, and when you're finally allowed to get that release and to cheer and stuff like that, it's been building up at certain points, you know, for minutes and for what feels like a long time. So it's nice to let you all know how we feel about what we're seeing out there and stuff. And this game was no different. It's just kind of indescribable. And there's Clage giving the okay. Yes, now you can clap. When you're prepping for something like this, I assume that you had to spend the most amount of time on title defense, or do you have to spend an equal amount of time, you know, trying to make sure you understand all the runs?
Yeah, so it's definitely a thing where you kind of need to focus on the fights that are, you know, a critical danger to your run. For me, in this run, you know, the first half of the game is pretty easy. I think there's like only 2 fights that even really pose a problem, and it's Tiger, because he's got like directionally dependent things that you have to keep in mind, and the number of times you punch manipulates what he does. And what else is it? I think. Oh, Aaron Ryan, because, you know, it's hard for me to hear, and if I don't get all 3 of the stars, then the KO doesn't work. So those were really the 2 that I practiced the most out of the first half. The rest I kind of didn't really care so much. I think maybe like I practiced Sandman a little bit, but the rest was just kind of like muscle memory that's built up over the years. So I could kind of wing that part.
So we talked about it earlier, and I think because we're on the fight now, like what happened here? What makes this so interesting? And it just seemed like it surprised you, or, you know, it seemed like a moment during this fight, the Hippo fight, the second title defense fight.
So similar to Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, you need to punch him early when he opens his mouth. Otherwise, you don't get enough hits in. And this is a super scripted fight where you need him at an exact hit point value before you throw this star. And you need to like collect another star, and if you don't have that exactly when he does this, then you can't KO him. So it's one of those things where it's like, if I made one mistake, if I threw one punch too early, if I didn't hit, you know, the early counters like every time, then, you know, it'd be an issue. But, you know, when it all lines up, it does.
Total side note, why is that a KO and not a TKO in this game?
So it's I don't know, like it's a thing with Hippo where when you knock him down once, he doesn't get back up.
Homage, perhaps, back to the
Pretty
the
much,
NES.
yeah.
Jeez. I'm looking back at it now, and all the good thoughts and the memories are coming back. You mentioned how much prep you put into it and the nerves that go into it. Do you finally get a chance when it's all over to enjoy the moment a bit? Because I know there's hours and hours. At this point, I assume hundreds, maybe not thousands of hours that go into prep. Do you ever get a chance to enjoy the moment? I'll ask Zallard first, but I'm also curious to hear about Sinister as well.
Yeah, it's funny, like, so I want to say when I did the Super Punch-Out run 2014, that one was weirdly one of the most tense because it was later in the week. That was on Friday. So most of the event was me just being, you know, like stressing out about my run, and Sinister probably had a similar thing, you know, with stressing out about his run because he was taking it very seriously that year. But it felt like every time after that, these runs were scheduled super early. Like, you know, I think this run was on like a Monday or a Tuesday or something. So it's just like, oh, I get to get it out of the way like immediately and just enjoy the rest of the week with friends, you know.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I totally am super happy and relieved after these runs are finished and it's in the past.
Sister, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's you got to try to take in the moment a little bit because, you know, you don't know how many times you're going to get this opportunity to be on the stage. And I think 2014, I that one still stands out to me because the crowd was just, it was so electric. The energy, you know, I could just feel the energy of the crowd each time I won a fight, and that was just really special. That's like something that I'll never forget. You know, so it's really a great memory.
It's something you mentioned about the video from 14, but it's something that while it doesn't quite, I'm sure it's not the same as being there. Watching it live was like this incredible thing as well. Like it felt like a very communal experience, like something we hadn't seen before because we hadn't seen it go down like that before. So it's I completely agree with you, and I'm glad to hear that at some point you do get a chance to enjoy it a bit. What's the quickest time you had gotten before you actually got on stage?
For this run, gosh, I'm trying to remember. It was, well, let's see here. I think I got like a 1:10 or 11 or something on this run, and I think, what did I say? It was like 6 minutes lower than that was my PB.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
it was something around there, and it was definitely one of those runs where it's just like, you know, oh, went to round 2 on this character, or like, oh, like lost on this character, you know.
Right. It's one of those things where it just kept getting more and more impressive, which was a lot to say at this point because you mentioned it's 26 fights and we're knee deep into it at this point, and it doesn't slow down. It just kept going and going and going.
Yeah, it's just so much, you know.
Right.
Like mentally, it's just like, all right, we made it through this fight. Let's try to recall everything from practice for this one, and you know, just on and on and on. And it feels like, you know, I remember being kind of like fatigued like near the end of this because it was just so long, and you know,
Sure.
so relieved to have it all done.
This is one of those things. The VOD's definitely available on YouTube and Twitch, and I'm not. Is there anything else we're missing from the fight? Because we've been talking now for almost 3.5 hours. I'm sure you're drained by this point. Is there anything else that, you know, behind the scenes or anything that you may want to share, or something that I might have missed before we start wrapping this thing up?
It's hard to say. Like I feel like pretty much everything's been covered at this point.
It's one of those things. I keep saying it's one of those things, folks, that you really, we have never seen things like this, and this is one of the things that GDQ is. So many people I hear where, man, the Tyson, I'm sorry, the punch out blindfolded runs are just something that I'm never going to forget, and I very much fall into that boat where it's definitely one of the things that got me into enjoying this. And even, I know it sounds in a strange way, but when you see somebody do something like this blindfolded, you're like, maybe I could try a normal speed run by itself. And I don't know if I ever would have done that had it not been for what you all did, 2011, 10, all these, all these 14, the years before. So pretty darn awesome. And I'm glad you continue to do it. I just, as a viewer and a fan, super thankful and fun to watch all these things we've gotten a chance to see. Do you think, Zallard, you may ever return to Punch Out Wii?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about like blindfolded, but I feel like I can't top this run ever in my life. So, you know, I'm happy with just crossing that off the list, but I think, you know, like going for other records would be pretty cool. I mean, I've been messing with ILs with this game for a little bit, but I kind of got side railed by the whole Sinister Tyson bet thing. So, I imagine whenever I complete a fight of Tyson with the uppercut, I'll probably come back to this. We'll see. We'll see how I'm feeling by then.
It's a pretty great game, and I'm glad that even though I know you've been dealing with some illness over the past months now, I appreciate the fact that you are streaming those attempts and giving it a go, because there is something, I know at some point you all are going to get tired of this game, but there is just something special about seeing you grind punch out attempts, whether it's Mike Tyson or whether it's this game or Super Punch Out there. It's one of those things where you've been doing it now for so long. It'll never get old watching, man. So thank you so much for doing it.
Thank you.
If we're gonna start wrapping it up there. If people do want to watch some of your attempts and see some of these things happen live, where can they find you, Zallard?
So you can find me at youtube.com/Zallard1 or twitch.tv/Zallard1. I'm this name like everywhere now. So.
And I will throw the same over to Sinister One. Where if people want to see your attempts, I know. Actually, what are you speedrunning right now? Anything fun going on?
Well, you know, I've become a chess streamer now. So if you like the game chess and you want to see somebody that's kind of a bit of a beginner progressing through the ranks, then come check me out. I'll still do some gaming though. Twitch.tv/Sinister1. That's the number one, like it's hopefully spelled on the screen there.
Yeah.
And then also same youtube.com/Sinister1. I would like to just add one other thing,
please,
because we didn't get to touch on this. So if you don't mind,
no, absolutely.
You know, the whole idea of blindfolded speedrunning has really grown tremendously in ways that I would have never imagined. And if you actually, go and look on YouTube or wherever you want, you'll see there are runs for games that you'd be like, how on earth could they beat that game blindfolded?
Yeah.
And, like Super Metroid or Link to the Past, games like this. And it's just, it's really crazy. So I think in future GDQs, eventually you're going to see more and more of these mind-blowing blindfolded runs coming out. So
yeah,
something to look forward to.
Yeah, it's important to point that out because I think it was the last GDQ, AGDQ, where Bubsia, who is like ridiculous at blindfold, he does like dozens and dozens of blindfolded games like they're nothing. He's got like setups for pretty much everything. He did Super Mario 64 16-star blindfolded.
Yeah. That was a great one. Yep.
Yeah.
Oh wow. It's
there's a website that they have. I would feel remiss to not plug it.
Please.
In their Discord.
While you're looking for it, the chat is asking, chess blindfolded when, Sinister?
Oh, I've got a little ways to go. I know that it is something that's done. I mean, a lot of the best chess players throughout history have done blindfolded exhibitions where they're not only playing one person, they'll be playing like 8 people blindfolded at the same time. So this is, that takes blindfolded to a whole different level. I'm just trying to learn how to, move the pieces correctly and not lose the game first. And maybe one day we'll get some blindfolded games going.
Okay, got it.
Go for it.
I'm gonna post it in chat. Is blindfoldedgaming.com. So this is like a repository for like every completed blindfolded run, whether it's like partial or, you know, completely. It's fascinating stuff. Just like look through there and be just shocked at how long this list of games is. It goes on and on.
It's wild to see that that's what's happened, and it wouldn't have happened had you all not tried doing some of these things, you know, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago. That's wild that it's become a thing. I mean, we see it as categories. These are things you could actually submit nowadays. So wild. So cool. The link's blocked. We can include it. Yeah, no, it's totally. You mentioned it. That's an easy way for people. Can you say the link again, Zallard?
Yeah. So I guess like I couldn't post it because I'm not mod, but it is blindfoldedgaming.com. So it'd be pretty easy to find. You could probably Google it, and it'll be like the first thing you see.
And what a great way to wrap this up. Thank you both for being here and reliving these moments with us, because I think it's fair to say GDQ would not, I'm sorry, let me take that back. Speedrunning, the community may not be what it is today without some of these really memorable moments from the GDQ stage. So thank you both for being here. Really do appreciate it. And
Absolutely.
With that, folks, that is going to be it for us. Thank you so much for joining us here on the GDQ Hotfix. If you're watching right now and you want to help support and keep this content going, anything you do, any sub, any bits, anything you donate during this time period goes to keeping the GDQ Hotfix and all of our shows that happen throughout the week alive. So thank you so much for supporting, just being here. Even if you're lurking, you are supporting this content right now. Thank you so much for making things like this happen. My name's Lat Mackey. If you're all interested in conversations and things like this, I have a podcast where I chat with speedrunners of all different varieties. And in fact, Salt was a guest on it way back when. It's in one of the earlier episodes. You can go to sequencebreakpodcast.com to find all of that stuff there. I am not ready yet to let everyone know what the next Games Done Classic is going to be on. But let me tell you that I promise you won't want to miss it. I do this show about once a month, depending on how dates and things open up, but it's always going to be on a Sunday, or it'll be on the weekend at least. So thank you all for being here. I hope you all have a wonderful time. If you're watching this on YouTube, please don't forget to like and subscribe. All of that, once again, goes to support all this great content. Thank you all so much for being here. Hope you have a great rest of your night, and I'll see you all later. Bye-bye. Have a good one. See you later.